Happy Veterans Day, guys.
Happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there.
This is a special day, and I've been waiting for this since I started the podcast. I wanted to bring this man on for a long time, and we go way back, but I knew that this episode, this day, would be very special to him with his history and involvement in the military and his entrepreneurial life that's extended since then. And while I'm here, those of you that are watching on YouTube, make sure that you're subscribed, and the ones that are listening on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, also make sure you're subscribed and give a review at the bottom. I got to get on with you guys. But this man, his name is Gill Hayon. We were fraternity brothers back in the day.
Yes, we were.
Yeah, we've also intermingled along the way. He is the president of AVGear US and was the sniper team leader while he was in the U.S. Army from 2009 to 2013.
Correct.
Boom. So without further ado, Mr. Gill Hayon.
Thank you very much, Jake. It has been, first of all, it's great to be here and to watch you and your show and your podcast get to where it is, and seeing the guests on it. It's just exciting, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm honored that you thought of me for this episode. So thanks.
Appreciate it. Also, I have to thank you for the lovely cameras. Gill's actually the one that set me up for the cameras that helped this podcast flourish. It really started taking off once I started recording it, and people got that visualization of people that are in Vegas that aren't, just your stereotypical model servers or bartenders.
Right.
There's so much diversity out here that's not just like a culture. And
it's crazy. It's crazy what people think about being a Vegas local or living in Las Vegas that have no idea, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you're not originally from Vegas, correct?
No. I was born in California, and I lived in Israel for a few years as a child as well. I'm a first-generation American. My parents are Israeli, so we lived there for about 4 years, from the age of 5 to around 9. Came back to California, and we moved out to Vegas when I was a teenager. Been out here since 2002, so 18 years now.
So you're pretty much a local at this point.
Yeah,
It's Vegas raised.
Vegas, all the formative years, right?
Do you remember any of your childhood while you're in Israel?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember a lot of Israel. It's a completely different culture. First of all, I think it goes without saying. Israel is beautiful. I mean, people have a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of controversy revolving around Israel. But as a child, you don't really feel any of those things. You're not really involved in the politics. You're just kind of living. I had a great childhood in Israel. I thought Israel is a fantastic place. If I ever have kids, I would probably have them live there for at least a few years as well, just to kind of stay in touch with the culture and know where they come from. It is a different culture. A lot of American people are off-put by some of the isms and the tropes that is being in Israel. But overall, I think that the place gets a bad rap. And it's a fantastic, fantastic country.
It's crazy how just with religion and how much controversy surrounds just that plot of land based off of old scriptures that we don't know if they're actually true or not, or who wrote them, and that's all the controversy. And it seems like it will never end.
Absolutely, but archaeology does suggest that there is definitely, not even suggest, it has proven that there has been thousands and thousands of years of ties of the Jewish people to that land. So you can talk about the Bible as we don't know who wrote it or when it was written, but if you dig in the ground, you'll find the history, and that's what they're doing there all the time. And it's incredible, some of the things that they're digging up over there. It's unbelievable.
It's fascinating.
It is.
I went to Israel once for 10 days, and I was completely taken away by it. It's like a beautiful desert. And when I went there was the winter of 2012. And that's kind of when the Gaza rockets going on. That's when one of the big conflicts were going on. And
Operation Protective Edge, right?
It's something like that. Yeah, I was still 20 at the time. I wasn't really too sure. But you see, in Israel, first, everyone's fit. You don't really see any obese people. Everyone's walking around casually. You see tanks just driving on the road, and I've honestly never felt safer.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, it gets a bad rap, especially for people who travel. They're like, oh, is it going to be safe? Are we going to get attacked? And the reality is that, it being an Israeli who lives in Israel, that's part of the lifestyle. Sometimes are there things that are stressful and kind of, combative, I guess you can say. Absolutely. But, in all reality, they manage to continue living and they adapt. And yeah, I mean, they are very fit. The food culture there is a lot different too, a lot less less fats, a lot less meat. You know what I mean? So just
Yeah, when we stayed at the hotel, the Israeli salad is just like olive oil, salt, pepper, and tomatoes and cucumbers.
Exactly.
And that's literally every meal, every single day of the week.
simple, to the point, tastes good.
And everyone there has to join the military for 3 years as well, correct?
Yes.
Men and women?
Women have a mandatory service of 2 years, and men have a mandatory service of 3 years. There are some exceptions to those rules, however. If you have a disability physically, mentally, then you can be waived from your mandatory service. There's also some, controversial rules with the Hasidic Jews who live there. Like the stereotypical Jewish
like
guy
the
with
New
black
York
hat and the beard.
Jews,
the modest yahoos over there. There are situations where they don't have to serve either, for the most part. So a majority of those Israeli citizens do not have to serve, and I've got my opinion on that, and so do a lot of Israelis that aren't happy with it, because they get to enjoy the safety and security and the defense of the country without having to contribute to it. So it's kind of bullshit.
It's interesting. And when you join the military out there too, it's not like if you're joining it, you have to go into the front line of duties. I know there's a lot of intelligence gathering that.
Oh yeah. There's so many jobs. It's also like civil services, right? You have soldiers who for their whole entire military career are, doing the guided tours of the high school students around the base. Like, this is where you're going to go when you go to the army. This is what the barracks look like. This is where we train. So, there's some of them that lead the scouts, like the Israeli Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. Like, there's people who do, civil services and road maintenance. And it's not just about, security and about combat. It's about national service more than anything.
Yeah, I think that the route that Israel's taken towards mandatory military service is probably the right method, because in America, right when 2020 started, everyone was like, oh my God, World War III draft is coming.
I remember that.
Everyone is terrified of it. But if you look at it towards like, all right, this is a national service, like it's for 2 years or 3 years, and the majority of them aren't actually frontline duty. Whereas when you think of U.S. military, you're like, fuck, I'm going to be in the front lines. Like, I'm going to be a grunt.
Isn't that, just to point on that, isn't that great that when you think about the military, you think about the guy with the gun and that's all he does, right? That's all people normally think. Like, they don't know that they do, but they don't associate somebody with, when they thank somebody for their service, or like, they don't associate, were you a cook? Were you a mechanic? Were you a logistics person? Were you an office worker? You know what I mean? When you think military, you think about the guy wearing his full kit and a helmet and the gun out on the battlefield, which, is not true for a majority of military personnel overall.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's just an American, I wouldn't say it's a myth, but do you think that's more of an American civilian ideology, just because of how the media kind of has exacerbated the violence through Fox News and CNN and MSNBC?
I would attribute it less to the news, and I would associate it more with pop culture, and I would associate it more with, war in general, right? You think war, you think fighting, you don't think about the support stuff on the back end. You think about the guys who are on the ground, fighting a war. You look at videos of D-Day and you see these guys running off the boats, and that's your perception. That is what you are emulating when you think of the military. Also, we watch a lot of movies. We watch a lot of movies with, there's a lot of movies that are created based on military. It's a great subject matter to make a movie on, no doubt about it. And you don't see the cook, making crappy mermite eggs in the morning. That's one thing about the military, and then the food in the military. I think we'll probably get to that a little bit later in the conversation. But they show the glorified nature of being a soldier or fighting a war, right? They don't show the reality of the military being a giant institution with so many moving pieces and so many departments and so many different variables and layers that make it function as a military power, right? So it's a huge bureaucracy corporation.
And when you think of the military, or when you think of war in general, as society progresses and technology progresses, you don't see as much like boots on the ground, hand fighting. Now you see a lot of like technological warfare. Some people consider COVID a biological warfare.
Absolutely.
There's
economic warfare that we're seeing as well.
With the sanctions, that's like some people will consider that an act of war.
Not necessarily by definition, but the sanctions, it depends on how you look at
That's
it, right?
What I'm saying,
So sanctions are essentially legal, but when you're talking about economic warfare, you're talking about having having the buying power to negatively affect another economy, and you do it purposefully and maliciously, right? And those are some things that we have seen in many patterns over the last 4 or 5 decades. We can go as far back as you want. These are, all these topics are things that I am really interested in. So if you ever want to brush onto that, I'm all
like I said, let's dive into it. What do you think outside of, let's say, physical or weapon warfare? What do you think is the second most popular type of warfare that is usually enacted on another country?
Right now, today would be cyber warfare. So it would be things like interception of classified documentation. It would be trying to take down systems that exist, the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure of government agencies and things like that. Things that, kind of start off and look like a nuisance, but they have a much bigger picture effect in curtailing actual, the interests of the country. That's a big one. I think there has been a wide variety of different attempts in like asymmetric warfare. I got interested in this.
What would asymmetric warfare be?
It's non-conventional, meaning it's very subversive. So it's almost an unnoticeable thing. I did a little bit of digging. This sounds very conspiracy-like, but because I have an understanding of the way that militaries and government organizations and the intelligence and what they do and how they do it, I think that there is potentially a measure of truth in this. There was a defector from the KGB who escaped from Russia, the former Soviet Union, in the mid '80s. His name was Yuri Bezmenov, and he basically got on with a couple of reporters and he spilt the beans on all these operations that Russia was doing. Mainly in the effect of ideological subversion. He was talking about the KGB and how the world has painted the KGB to be this super secret spy organization that'll, they have an umbrella and the tip will touch you and they'll squeeze the button and a little pellet of poison will get into your leg. Old spy stuff. But he says that 85% of the KGB is directly related to asymmetric warfare, where they don't ever, come on ground or associate with people. It's things that they do to manipulate the thought process of the population. And it starts with indoctrination in some programs with education. It goes into media that is consumed, commercials, products, TV shows, things like that. And the effect is to kind of change the overall mindset and to change the values, to demoralize a population, to make them have instability internally in their society.
So it's more of a polarization type thing, and this is probably a process that takes generations, not just something that can be done in a few months. You have to
100%. That's accurate, and not only that, he did this interview in 1983, I believe, and he said that they were already over 15 years underway, and the results are exponentially better than their KGB people ever thought could be, and now here we are, almost 40 years later. And it's, when you connect the dots and you look at his predictions and you look at this is what they're doing, and you look at our society today and how polarized we've become and how divided we are just down to our basic values and how we perceive the world. It's one can make a logical assessment to see if maybe there is some truth to that or there isn't. But hey, I'm going to be pointed out here as this is the guy with the Russian ideological subversion conspiracy. But hey,
I'm sure the people that are listening are probably thinking of one thing, which is the 2016 Russian meddling hack that, they tied to Donald Trump. And, whether you believe he was actually involved with it or not, just going on that ideology, they probably don't even need him to be involved to curtail up some sort of political belief or ideology to whatever their benefit is.
Absolutely. I don't even think it's about Donald Trump in particular. I think that there has been an attempt on every election in one way or another by a foreign country. And to think that other countries don't have an interest in swaying our politics here, I think that's a very naive notion.
We're on the grand stage.
We are on the grand stage. We are leading the world in every single way almost. We have the highest standard of living. In terms of, I don't know if you travel, you've been to other countries, you've seen how people live in other places. I mean, granted, we have problems here in the United States like every other country, but nobody has it as good as us here.
They're first world problems.
They're 100% first world problems for the most part,
So it's different. And something that I did see recently was that they announced that, or FBI did an investigation and noticed that China and Iran were actively trying to interfere in the election. And a lot of people are caught off guard because they're like, Iran, why would Iran be doing this? And, there's the nuclear, I forget.
The Iran nuclear deal
that
the Obama administration.
That restricts them. So I'm sure they're trying to circumvent that somehow.
Well, we pulled out of that deal. So there's a lot of policy confusion. There's a lot of gray area, right? I mean, at the end of the day, when you look at things and you look at things right now on the world stage, just real quick, so we don't do this whole show about politics, but we have Russia as an adversary of the United States economically. We finished the Cold War with them in the 80s. There's always been tension with Russia ideologically. The way that we live our lives is completely different than the way that the Russian government perpetuates that on their people. China, a huge political adversary. Iran has its own ideologies. They are definitely I would consider them a rogue country, kind of similar to North Korea. I mean, you take Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia, and there you have your Axis powers for World War III. There it is. Yes. You heard it here first, America.
Right here in my apartment.
Right here in this Las Vegas apartment.
They're actually trying to hack this current conversation before
FBI
it goes
agent
up.
Who's watching me. I know.
So you'd mentioned that you had a lot of fascination when it comes to different types of warfare, and you lived in Israel. So you saw the kind of military lifestyle that has been instilled into a country.
Sure.
Did you carry that through your entire life leading up to joining the military? Was that a thought that kind of just melded in your mind for a long time, or was there some other reason for you to finally sign the paper with the recruiter who probably came into your high school and said, Gill, I need you to come serve your country for the military?
That's not how that happened. But I will answer the question. Both my parents served in the Israeli military. My father is the youngest of 10 brothers and sisters. He was born in Israel before it was even a country. So most of his brothers and sisters fought in the Israeli War of Independence. One of them died in the Israeli War of Independence. She was doing high-level intelligence work. She was a spy, for a lack of better words, and she was killed in the line of duty. And because the level of her work was so secret, she actually has not gotten much recognition by the Israeli government for her work until 3 weeks ago, when my aunt contacted me from Israel and said that they are adding her to the War Heroes Memorial, and she is the first. My father's sister, her name is Tziona. She is the first woman in the history of the Israeli intelligence of the military in all of its history to be killed during a conflict, which was the War of Independence. So they honored her about 2 weeks ago in one of the memorials, and there's a lot of interest on her. There's a lot of interest on the unspoken heroes, particularly women, and how big of an asset they were during that, the time when you're turning a place that is war-torn and controlled by the British Empire into its own country. It's to get its own independence. It's marvelous, if you ask me. That story is fascinating to me. So military in general has been it's in my blood. Growing up, you play Army Man and you do all that stuff.
G.I. Joes, baby.
G.I. Joes all day
Joes.
with the Kung Fu grip. You play with your friends, and it's always an option kind of, but then I did not have that as I was growing older, teenage years. That wasn't a big overtone for what I thought I was going to do. I graduated high school a little early. I did a semester at a community college. I joined the workforce, and the grind was just, it was getting to me. I was there. I was 18 years old. I'm almost 19, and I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm going to keep serving at the Olive Garden and go to CSN and just blah. You know what I mean? And I had an opportunity, and one of my really good friends that I grew up with, he joined the Army. He just got back from his first deployment in Iraq, and he was back on leave, and we had a chat, and he kind of told me about all this type of stuff, and it got me thinking, you know what, maybe if it's temporary, that's cool. If it's a career, that's awesome too, but this is something that I want to do. So I went to the recruiter's office myself.
Wow, cut one step out of it.
Got one step out of it. Nobody had to reach out to me, and I got some information. I took my ASVAB test, did my physical, passed my background, and then I got time to choose my job. And I got pretty high. You have to take the ASVAB, which is an entry test. It's test that covers, algebra, writing. They make you, put the square peg in the round hole just to see how dumb you are, right?
It's like the SAT for college.
Exactly, but like the Barney style if you're 3 years old. So the way that works is you get scored out of 100, and the lowest score that you can get to join the military on your ASVAB is a 31. And when you get a 31, the only job opening you have available to you is the infantry. And for those of you who don't know, the infantry is literally, it's the grunt frontline soldier. Your sole purpose in life is to close on, engage, and destroy the enemies of the United States of America in close combat. And that's it. You don't have any other, when you're the guy fighting. You're the guy that people are thinking about when they think about the military. So for me, I got a 96 and I had a lot of options. I could have done intelligence. I could have been a helicopter mechanic. I could have been a drone pilot. I could have been a scuba diver. Could have done like EOD, like explosives disposal, like diffusing bombs underwater.
Are those the guys that wear those like crazy suits with like the robot arms that hang out of it?
Yep, they do. I mean, yeah, those are the EOD above ground. And when you're scuba diving, you're probably attached to a Marine or a Navy unit and you're undoing mines in the ocean and things like that. I mean, I could have had any job that I wanted and I ended up choosing to go to the infantry. Yeah.
Why was that?
Because, I didn't want to join the military in a time of war and not have the opportunity to participate.
Yeah. So this would have been
2009.
So 8 years into when George Bush declared war on Afghanistan.
And Afghanistan was 2001. Iraq was 2003. This was during the surge, where there was a large upgrade in troop numbers in both of those battle spaces. So there was no question in my mind that I was going to deploy, and quickly, which did happen. And so I did that. Went to basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia. Did my my infantry school there. I think it was 16 or 18 weeks. Graduated at the top of my class.
As your ASVAB would have predicted.
I mean, yeah, you have to, kind of be in shape too. The infantry likes to run and they like to hike, and but I got my fat ass on the treadmill before I went, and I made sure that I was in good shape before I got to boot.
It seems like Fort Benning's pretty popular. I actually have known probably about 4 or 5 people who've actually gone there for their training.
Fort Benning is the home of the infantry.
Oh, that's
and
probably
in the last couple of years, they joined the tank school over there as well. So now it's the Maneuver Center of Excellence. It's basically the capital of training for combat arms in the regular army.
So did you get any sort of recognition or any sort of like promotion because you graduated in first of your class?
No, they gave me a certificate, and it was signed by a lieutenant colonel. And basically what that certificate of achievement does is later on in the career, it counts towards your points if you were to be promoted. Like if you were to get to the rank of sergeant, you have to go through a board, and you have to have a certain amount of awards and accomplishments that give you points. Now, there's a ton of them, but you have to have this many points total. So it counts towards that. I mean, and it's nice to put on the wall. Hey, here's good job. Gold star, right?
Show it with all your other privates.
Yeah, whatever. Basic training is basic training. You know what I mean? Like that's exactly what it is. It is the most basic of training. The reality is if you're able to follow instruction and be Forrest Gump and just do what they do until they tell you to stop, you're going to make it through as long as you're not fat or get injured or too stupid that you injure yourself.
Yeah, basic training, it's almost like college in a sense, where when people go to college and, you went to college as well, you see this, and a lot of us don't even actually use our degree to what we end up doing in life, but it shows that you can be trained and that you have the mental capacity to understand what is being taught to you and to be able to go off and do things on your own or under your own discretion.
Absolutely.
with a time crunch that's
right.
kind of attached to it.
At least you're organized enough to complete a task to a satisfactory manner, right? I mean, and absolutely, college trains you to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's what essentially boot camp is there for. More than just the training, it's about the reprogramming, right? It's about breaking down your shitty habits and, indoctrinating you to be a soldier. I mean, the reality is, particularly in the infantry, is that you're going to be trained to be a part of the most lethal fighting force that exists on the planet. And for that, You can't just be Joe Schmo from mama's basement eating milk and cookies to just snap your fingers and be that. You have to go through a lot of regimentation. You have to go through a lot of adverse situations and stress that kind of train your mind. And some people are strong enough to make it through it. Most are, and some people can't handle it. You know what I mean? And so by the time basic training is over, you can set apart the guys who are going to make it and the guys who don't. Majority of them do make it. It's not that bad. It's getting better. You know, every year there's a new thing. Like now they just implemented nap time. I heard a couple years back they were given, snacks before bedtime. That didn't happen for me when I was in basic training.
I hear hazing is a pretty prominent thing that happens in there as well. You don't have to go into details or anything like that.
I would love to go into details because I think people should understand this. Hazing, first of all, is a very subjective term. A lot of it comes from like, oh, you need to do this to be accepted into the group. If it has purpose for training and purpose for survival, I am 100% pro. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say the two together because then there could be a soundbite later on in life when I run for president or something.
Like
pro, at the end of the day, it's not some silly job where you can have, where your feelings matter.
Yeah, your life is on the line.
Your life is on the line, and the lives of everybody on your squad is on the line. And you really actually realize that the first time you get into a life or death situation. My first firefight, that's when I got that. That's when the light switch flipped. You always know, you always think, I'm supposed to do this because the guy to my left and the guy to my right are depending on me to do my job, right? You have to have that mindset. You have to be undeniably and unequivocally committed to completing the mission as prescribed in the way that the Army, the military works in order for you to be successful. And a lot of accidents and bad things happen when people are not on that same page. So like I mentioned earlier, if it has value, in order for you to be in the mindset of being on point like that, especially when you are in a combat scenario, then 100% teach the kids how to be when you send them to war. Don't baby them. Don't give them milk and cookies. Yes, nap time is nice, but you know what I mean? In moderation.
And hazing isn't just a physical hazing as well. It's just like warfare. There's emotional hazing,
sure.
Mental. You're basically pushing people's limits in different ways
100%.
To see what their full capacity is.
Yes, or what their breaking point is. Mm-hmm. Because also when you think about it, as a leader in the Army, you need to fully assess the skills and the level of which your soldiers, your team, your squad that you're in charge of are performing at, so you can make the proper decisions on the battlefield. It's all relevant. So I'm not going to say hazing is good because it's not good. It's not good for people. It doesn't stimulate cohesion within a team, and you need that cohesion to be successful in combat. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But if there's a soldier who's lacking in any of those areas and he does need to train, you can do that in a controlled environment where you put them under a lot of stress and you make sure that they're building themselves up to a point where they're going to be able to handle it when shit hits the fan in the sandbox. I think that's a very logical perspective. And if you think that shielding someone's emotional frailty is going to do them a service when they are going to be confronted with a hostile enemy that wants to kill them and everybody wearing the same uniform as them, I can tell you from experience, you're dead fucking wrong. Make them tough. You have to.
Yeah, you're strong as your weakest link. That is the most important thing. And they always say that in business, but when you're in a firefighter, a life or death situation, those are the things that you think of.
Absolutely. 100%.
So tell us about your first firefight experience. You mentioned it previously. Was it?
We're jumping through the story. My first firefight experience, September 7th, 2010. I deployed to Tikrit. I didn't even tell you my story, man. Let's
go. Let's bring it back a little bit.
We'll bring it back because this is important. So I graduated from boot. I got to my duty station, which it was the 25th Infantry Division in Hawaii, in Schofield Barracks, which is on Oahu. Because of my performance at basic training, I did not get assigned to a unit right away. I was held in the reception unit for about a week until the battalion that I was supposed to be assigned to was holding their tryouts for their reconnaissance platoon. The battalion I was assigned to was 1st Battalion, 27th Infantry Regiment. The Wolfhounds were one of the most notable regular Army units. We are a historical unit. There's a lot of cool stuff that my unit has done.
That
the
Wolfhounds sounds badass.
Yeah, for all of you guys to see.
Hey, those who are listening, you need to turn on YouTube so you can see it.
Yeah, see the crest. It adds 5 horsepower automatically when you put it on. So reconnaissance in the regular Army, some people confuse that with like, Marine Recon, which is a special forces outfit. We're not special forces. We are a specialized combat unit. You can call us an enabling asset on the battlefield, right? Reconnaissance is basically a combat field intelligence unit. So we had some sophisticated camera equipment. We did a lot of things with, observation, gathering intelligence. Intelligence goes up to higher command and they make decisions on the battlefield based on that. Some of those things involve, sleeping in a hole with a camera, a very sophisticated camera that can see, 20,000 kilometers. I don't know, like just ridiculous. Like if you were standing on the strip, and I was standing at one of the mountains that's, on the edge of town, at any side of the valley, right? And you had one of these sophisticated cameras, you would be able to read my name tag standing on the top of that mountain.
Pretty much not your commercial grade shit.
Nah, I'm in AV now, and I don't have access to that stuff. So I did the reconnaissance tryout. It was a 3-day process. It involved some aquatic stuff. It involved a long ruck march. It involved them giving you a giant box full of gun parts, and you have to assemble. Just imagine taking 10 guns, disassembling them into the very bottom pieces of them to the most you would ever take them apart. And they just dump the box in front of you and say, here you go, 15 minutes, put them back together.
It's like Legos.
It's like Legos, but with guns. That's all these things to kind of test you. And even if you don't succeed, off the bat, especially a brand new private coming in, obviously if you show promise, then you may or may not get accepted. The thing about recon is that, we were attached, we were in the headquarters company, which is where all of the non-combat units are, the office people and the cooks and the mechanics and la-da-da-da-da. But we were one of the only 2 combat units there, and it's because we were specialized. We would be attached to other parts of the element in order to help them with the mission. We also got a lot better training, and we were favored pretty heavily because we were fucking awesome. And we performed well. Our standards were high. We were a bunch of good soldiers. All the leaders had a Ranger tab, some of them special forces experience. It was a good place to be. I got lucky. And I got lucky that the opportunity for me to join that platoon, recon, as opposed to like a regular line platoon, like Alpha Company 1st Platoon or Charlie Company 3rd Platoon, just your regular grunts, because I was being trained. My mentorship in the military was from guys who were a little bit more intelligent, a little bit more sophisticated, had done much sexier things in their past deployments, and they are able to give that mentorship that really gives you the edge over some guy who got a 31 on an ASVAB and has stripes on his chest because he's been in the Army for 9 years, and you have to promote him at that point, right? So
yeah, mentorship's really important.
100%.
Even not just in the military, and we'll get on this later in the road of entrepreneurship. There's usually somebody who is older, has gone through the trials and tribulations multiple times, and they want to pass down that knowledge to you. That's a misconception that a lot of people are unaware of, is that the older generations, they actually want to share their knowledge with you. And this is something that I've learned through the podcast, is when you reach out to people who are veterans in whatever field that they're in, they're happy. And a lot of them, more often than not, will share their knowledge with me and say, hey, I'll come on the podcast and let people know, because they're just excited and thrilled, and that they can share that down with you as well.
100%. I agree with that completely. I like to share my stuff. I like to help people out. I like to help the younger kids out. And I also love listening to the older guys. They've got some crazy stories. Having a fireside chat with a Vietnam veteran, man, that's some real talk. Makes me feel like my service was nothing. I was a real war over there.
That was one of the most deadliest wars.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think in terms of like casualties to deployed soldiers,
yes,
something like that is like one of the worst we've had.
I mean, I think you had like a 1 in 3 chance of getting gravely injured or dying, right? Like that's pretty horrendous. Those are bad stats.
That's terrifying. Yeah. You think coronavirus is bad, where you have a 0.01% chance of dying?
Yeah, 100%, right? Or losing a leg or whatever that might be. It was, I don't know. I wasn't there, but I heard some stories, and that shit was crazy. Yeah. I mean, my unit was in Vietnam, and we were very highly decorated. The Wolfhounds produced, I think, a dozen or so Medal of Honor winners in Vietnam, some of whom I got to meet, one of which I got to hold my unit flag, our colors, at his funeral in Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
That's something I find so interesting with the military, is there's all these subgroups, and they're almost like fraternities or little organizations, the brotherhoods. It's one, obviously, I think the Marines actually changed it from brotherhood to something else that's
I don't know,
a little bit more describing of both genders, but or three genders. I don't even know at this point.
72 according to Facebook. Yeah.
But it's just cool that they can pass down their history and knowledge with you, but more pertinent to the little what's it? A company is.
A company is one. Normally, you would go with battalion or regiment for the title, right? So, like the Wolfhounds is the 27th Infantry Regiment, and in this regiment there are various battalions. There's 127, there's 227, but the Wolfhound Regiment is the historical group. So there's a Wolfhound Historical Society. There's Wolfhound groups. There's this. It's all centered around the Wolfhounds. You know, Rakkasans are one of those same units from the 101st. Like there is historical units that have their names that are verified and you know, given permission by the Army to be these types of like well-known historical units. And mine is one of them. We did some cool stuff. History is very long, and so there's a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of brotherhood. You know, there's a lot of guys that are about the division itself, which has a ton of these units in there. And definitely many of these veterans are involved with it well after their service, and they are involved with the current members of those units as well. So it's a cool, an alumni kind of thing, right? It's pretty awesome.
It gives you much more relatability. When you see one of them talking, you're like, oh, I've been in his shoes. Whereas like somebody who wants to, you know, just be successful, and you're looking at Jeff Bezos and he's just like completely in a field of his own. So like, you know, I want to aspire to be that status, but he's never going to talk to you and tell you his steps. Or if you see somebody that's in your regiment that's been at the upper level status, or, you know, a lot of successes and different things like that, then they can share that knowledge with you.
Definitely. Yeah. So back to the story, so we can get to the war stuff, which is what everybody likes to hear about. So recon, a normal infantry platoon has between 36 and 40 soldiers in it. You know, 4 9-man squads for a regular line infantry platoon, plus a PL and a platoon sergeant. Recon had 3 6-man recon teams. They're called SKTs, or small kill teams, and within the recon platoon, outside of those 18-ish members, depending on what our rank filling levels were at the time, there's also a 2-man sniper team attached to each one of those SKTs. But those snipers are their own section within the platoon. So it's kind of different. You know, you have your recon scouts for your 3 SKTs, then you have your sniper section, and within that sniper section, 2 snipers are attached to each one of those teams. So that is how that element is made up. So it's a smaller group, more training on specific areas, specifically with, you know, long range precision marksmanship and intelligence gathering and, you know, reconnaissance stuff.
It's like the movie American Sniper.
He was Chris Kyle was a Navy SEAL. He was a Special Forces sniper. Okay,
but it was two of them too, like that smaller group.
Yes.
And he like watched over everyone that was part of that group.
Exactly. So in a sniper team, in a 2-man team, there is a spotter and there is a shooter. The spotter is normally the more senior guy in the team. Would be the team leader, essentially, unless yours was built in a reconnaissance platoon where your section leader was basically leading everything. The spotter is the more senior guy. People usually say, "Oh, you weren't a shooter." And I'm like, I was a shooter for a while, and when I became a team leader, I was a spotter. You know, with that experience, with that leadership, with your situational awareness, and with your experience as a shooter prior, you understand the dynamic of what it would take to be on target on a mission. So you're actually calling the shots. The shooter is following your direction and putting the crosshair on the target and pulling the trigger the way that he should be. But you are actually controlling the sniper. So that is definitely an interesting dynamic. Every team, it's a close bond. You know, you get to know your shooter and you get to know your spotter on a very intimate level in terms of understanding how you think. You develop your own lingo. You develop your own little isms that you guys know about each other, especially in combat situation, because it just creates the flow. There has to be synergy in a sniper team for you to be an effective asset. So that was a big part of my overall, you know, leadership experience is, you know, working in a small team, taking one person and, you know, really, I had multiple shooters in my team because people rotate in and out. They get sent to other units, la-da-da-da-da. And it's a great experience. If anything, that mentorship aspect really kind of was rounded out and polished for my time as as a sniper team leader. And it was great. Back to the original story. The tangents here are real.
They're important though when you talk about the military, because there's so many different misconceptions and understandings. And there's a lot, I wouldn't say even recently, probably since Vietnam and on, there's a lot of negative stigmas that surround it just because of this grave word that I'm about to say, the military industrial complex, which a lot of people don't favor that much. And that word pops up time and time again. And people just think like, oh, these are mindless trained zombies who are just killing everybody with no sense of morality or anything like that.
That is a misconception. And that's one of those things where, those people who believe that there is not enough evidence in the world that you can put in front of their faces to change their mind. That's just what it really comes down to. It's one of those ideologies that they get and they're stuck with, and they think that we're a bunch of cowboys over there with machine guns playing Rambo and just mowing down the village, and nothing can be farther from the truth. If anything, accidents do happen. It does occur, that there's no way around it sometimes, but the level of professionalism that is part of that regimentation is definitely ingrained to a degree in pretty much every soldier, right? And it really comes down on the leadership, because if you're a firm leader, then your guys don't act like jackasses, and the mission gets accomplished properly and cleanly, high and tight. And I think that anybody who does prescribe to that mindset probably doesn't know enough veterans on a personal level to really make that assumption. And if they do, they've met the wrong ones that are just get drunk and are jackasses, and probably not the infantry, and probably brag about how many people they killed when their body count is 0. And there's plenty of those guys out there as well. So, it really depends on who you meet and how well you know them and how well you know their heart as a person. And that's what it really comes down to. With that, on that note, on that tangent, so talked about recon, talked about sniper. So I deployed with recon. We went to Tikrit, Iraq.
That was your choice after you're done training and everything?
You don't have a choice, bro. Once you sign that line, it ain't your choice. But that's where I was put. I passed the tryout period, and then I was in recon. I was in SKT-1, and we deployed probably about, I want to say like 6 months after I got out of boot. So I got to train with the unit a little bit. We did some good training, got the flow, but you're never really ready until you go there. We got to Tikrit, which is in northern Iraq in Salahadin province, which is where Saddam Hussein was born. That was his city. He had a palace there, and his sons had a palace there. And it was very well known to be a very pro-Saddam and anti-American place. When we got there, the unit that we were replacing, they suffered some casualties over their deployment, and they had created a scenario in that city that was not really a great thing to walk into. There were some parts of town, like big blocks, multi-block radiuses, where there has been 0 U.S. military presence for the previous year. So they were just doing whatever the fuck they wanted. And those people who live in that area has not seen a soldier in a year, and so they were running that place.
So it's basically no man's land for you guys.
They called them the no-go zones. And I remember when we got the brief, my squad leader was like, "Are you trying to tell me that there has not been one U.S. soldier in any of these areas for the past year?" And their first sergeant was like, "That's correct." And we're like, "Oh, fucking great." I didn't know what the hell that meant, but he sure did, because this was his 4th deployment, I think, or something like that. I don't know. He was well adversed to the situation. Not his first rodeo. But yeah, we were there for a year, for 12 months. My first firefight was probably, I think it was sometime between the first month and the second month in country. For the first 3 weeks, you do a left seat, right seat with the unit that's leaving. So when they go on missions, they leave some of their soldiers behind, and they take the leaders from the new unit that's coming in to kind of take them on the left seat and the right seat to show them this is where we go. These are our missions. This is the city. Explain this, explain that.
Yeah, you don't want to let them go in blind.
Exactly. So that type of changeover happens pretty commonly. That's a thing that you do when you are being replaced with another unit, right? So that whole process takes a few weeks anyways before we're out doing missions independently. And we went to do a patrol No, we had State Department people. So my platoon was tasked out with a few different types of missions. This particular one was not necessarily a combat mission. It was more of a security mission. We had State Department officials from Washington, D.C. that were in Tikrit to meet with their government and to do whole policy, politics, and stuff like that. So we were tasked out with being their private security, essentially, while they were doing their politics.
Yeah, so this isn't like a seek and kill kind of mission.
No.
It was protect the assets.
Yes, so this wasn't a hard hit. It was not a kill or capture. It wasn't a raid. It wasn't anything like that. It was just, because of how elevated our status was within the battalion, obviously when big government says to, Army, hey, I've got delegates from the United States, from the Pentagon that are here. I need you guys to make sure that they're good. They try to put the best platoon on to make sure that nothing squirrely happens. Anyways, so we were actually about to go on an engagement with one of the government officials there in Tikrit. And we had a bunch of kids throw grenades at our convoy while we were on the street. We were fighting multiple different groups in Tikrit, different kind of terrorist organizations. Everybody's familiar with Al-Qaeda, or AQI as they call it, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, because there's Al-Qaeda everywhere. And then there's a bunch of other smaller factions of groups that are not affiliated with Al-Qaeda. As a matter of fact, a lot of them fight each other, which is interesting.
That's something they don't really talk about.
They don't really talk about it. Yeah, they don't talk about a lot of stuff in the news. They don't talk about the payoffs. They don't talk about how many sheiks get thousands of dollars in cash and tell all of their people in their community to not shoot at Americans, and then their minds change and now it's time to shoot at Americans, and then another 20, 50 grand later, we're not shooting at Americans anymore, we're on our side again. That stuff happens all the time. Sons of Iraq was one of those factions. You go into the locales and they have that thing going on too. It's very fractured, the whole scenario over there. Even if it's like we were involved in a place that had a sectarian war between Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims, right? So even amongst the Shias, they would fight against each other because ideological differences and just, the power grabbing that was occurring with the lack of military and police, Iraqi military and police. Americans can only do so much. We don't know the community. We don't understand the dynamic of what it's like to be an Iraqi person. So, it wasn't really our place at that point. We weren't really capable of doing it unless you wanted like an all out, like just take care of the job. So,
last man standing
type thing, which was definitely not the case. It was not that at all. But anyways, so one of the groups we were fighting was JRTN. It's a long Arab name that we turned into an acronym. It was financed, I believe, by Saddam's daughter, who at the time was living in Syria. And it was led by one of Saddam's old generals that was very highly regarded. And one of their key things that they did was that they basically recruited children between the ages of 10 and 15 or 16 and gave them money and candy and cell phones and all this type of stuff. And then they gave them ammunition and guns and grenades, and they would tell them to hit the American convoys, right? And so one of their favorite things to do in Tikrit was RKG-3s, which are old Russian grenades. They're almost like World War II grenades. Like
the stick ones?
Yeah, the stick ones. It looks like a wine bottle, kind of, with a long neck. So what they would do is they would take those and they would create a little parachute at the end of it, and they would slice the parachute, and they'd have it hanging, and they would chuck it, and the parachute would point the projectile of that grenade right at the direction you were throwing it. So they were super effective. And when we got there, that we were just notified from our intelligence that, a shipment of 10 or 12,000 of these grenades just made it into Tikrit. So we're like, of course they did. So we were getting hit with those pretty frequently. So what happened was a bunch of kids started throwing grenades at us from a crowded market street. And they were targeting all of the turrets in our vehicles. We were mounted at this time. We were not on the ground. And they were throwing it at the guys who were, had their heads out of the strikers and the MRAPs who were on the guns, and just trying to knock out the fully automatic belt-fed machine gun.
Yeah, they knew what they were targeting first.
Of course,
they had a strategy.
They have a strategy. They watch. They will provoke just to see how you react, and they will learn your tactics, and they will try to use that how you react to their contact as a telltale of what they'll do when they actually mean it. Right. This one was not super big, but it was heavy. You know, when you have like between 8 to 11 people throwing grenades at your trucks, it's a pretty hectic situation. One of my team leaders who was on the sniper team, he took a grenade to the face. The RKG-3 went through the armor and actually penetrated the turret armor, and he just took a huge blast. He's alive. He made it. He's definitely not seeing well out of one of his eyes. And his face is a little messed up. I actually talked to him about 3 weeks ago. He's doing good. He lives in Georgia. He's got 2 girls. And then some of the grenades blew the doors open on one of the MRAPs, and a bunch of the guys took shrapnel, in their arms and in their legs, and kind of got peppered. But this wasn't a situation where, everybody got rocked all at once. It was just we got ambushed in a crowded market street while we were in our vehicles. Obviously, you go through the motions, you return fire, you eliminate and neutralize the threat, assess the damage, and continue mission. Daniel Olson, he took the grenade, and he was bleeding pretty bad. We didn't think he was going to make it at that time. So there was no time to stick around and fully engage or to pursue. We returned fire, and we handled that in place until we got the order from our platoon leadership that we need to evacuate immediately because we might have a guy down. So
yeah, isn't that before we go on? Isn't that one of the, I guess, the main things to do when you have a soldier who's down in the unit is to save them first or to protect them?
If you can, then yes.
If you can, yeah.
I mean, it really depends. If saving them or protecting them is going to compromise the lives of your soldiers, you have to make a decision, right? And that's one of those things that's completely dependent on that scenario right there. In reality, we're all in trucks. Everybody was mounted. I was up in a turret. I was in a Striker, which is like an 8-wheeled pirate ship. It's like a huge tactical vehicle. You got 2 turrets in the back, 1 in the front, 50 caliber machine gun that's being controlled by a joystick and a screen. It's called an RWS on the inside. So you've got 4 to 5 barrels pointing out of your gun and covering 360. So I was in the back left on a 240 Bravo machine gun, which was actually mounted on the truck. It wasn't my gun. But when we were in movement, that's where I was, machine gunner. So, they were aiming, they were going for us, the guys on the top of the truck with the gun, because they knew they couldn't really penetrate the actual vehicle. Not with those grenades. So, I mean, you're in a crowded street. It's a crazy situation. I remember it so clearly. I remember the tunnel vision. I remember everything slowing down immensely.
Adrenaline is flowing.
And then you react without even thinking about it. It's your training kicks in. And that's the thing about the regimentation, about the muscle memory, repetition when you train, because at no point in time did I stop and think, oh, well, what do I do? I was already on the gun, hand down, got my side picture in and go. And that's how it works. People in Hollywood, they glorify a lot of this stuff. And I mean, I think it's particularly for the first one because it is, and then once it's over, within 45 seconds, 60 seconds, it's done. Order, hey, CASEVAC, we're rolling out. Truck starts moving, and then you maintain security, but you can replay it frame by frame by frame by frame by frame afterwards, which is what I experienced after my first firefight. So that was pretty interesting. That's never happened to me before. That, obviously, that type of reaction. But I, you learn a lesson, when your guys get injured, could have died, right? You know what I mean? It's not for anybody for a lack of not doing their job. I mean, obviously our eyes are on there, but no one's looking for a 10-year-old to throw a grenade at your truck.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? It's one of those things, especially, my first deployment.
Yeah. So after your first firefight, did your perception of the mission change at all, of why you guys were there, or the perception of maybe just combat in general? Because when you see, I guess this is more so in movies, kind of the infantry members and people of the military seem to be very eager and excited, and then they get into combat, and then when they come back, they're basically like, this is not for me. Why am I here? How did I get here? Any sort of your perceptions change after that?
When they come back from what? When they come back from war?
From like their first fight. And the like camera shows them like in their bunker and they're talking, and you can just see like the energy just drained out from them, because they realize that this is a real life situation.
Sure. Yes, my perception did change. That was the day where the light switch flipped. We had to get him. We had to get Olsen out. He was bleeding profusely, so his face and his neck were shredded, and blood coming out of everywhere. And the neck is a hard place to stop the bleeding. You know what I mean? In general, so we had to get him back to base right away. There was a helicopter waiting. They pulled him out. Again, he's in shock. He's bleeding out pretty nicely. And they loaded him on a helicopter and took him to Baghdad to do immediate surgical intervention so that he would stop the bleeding. And he survived, and they sent him to Walter Reed, and got his Purple Heart and all that good stuff. And but when you see that, and obviously we didn't know, we all thought he was going to die. It was bad. None of us thought he was going to make it, so that's obviously a soul crushing thing to go through, on the immediate rebound off of one of the most, kinetic and violent events that you experience, and your adrenaline is through the roof, and all of these things go down. It's not how you want your first firefight to go. You want to win, not necessarily that we lost, but you want to go over there and handle business and everybody comes back okay. Mm-hmm. So we all take it personally to an extent that was not the case, but we're all happy that he lived. But yes, change your perception. That's when I realized that this shit was real, like really real, because I just experienced it. You can tell yourself all you want, prepare yourself all you want mentally, but it takes that to really drive it home and for your whole mindset to change. So yes, mindset definitely changed. The gravity of what we were doing really set in. And if anything, it motivated me more to be the best that I could possibly be at my job, so that doesn't happen to my other teammates that are here, my other guys in my platoon, all the people that we're here with, that, we barbecue back home, and, we hang out with each other's families and babysit their kids and drink beers on a Sunday. Like, that's your family. So and it did. The mindset changed. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about war. It wasn't about oil. It wasn't about patriotism. It wasn't about all these things that people are like, we're going to war, go get them, boys. It was about making sure the dude to the left and the dude to the right make it home. That's what that's when it becomes personal.
It's a very introspective time to say the least.
Absolutely. And simultaneously, on that same day, our sister platoon in Bravo Company took a huge hit. It was a mass casualty situation. They were actually doing a mission with the Iraqi army in an Iraqi army base. And one of the Iraqi military guys was actually an Al-Qaeda guy. And he just walked up into their strikers. I mean, these guys, like, we're in an Iraqi military base. It's not like we're at war with the Iraqi military. We're actually supporting each other. Like, we go on missions together. So it's a good time. You can relax, take off your kit, sit by the truck, have a cigarette. Your posture is not in a high security level. You're in a base. One of the Iraqi army guys, he turned and he basically started firing his machine gun into all of the strikers, and he wounded like 10 guys and killed 2 of them, including one of my buddies from basic training. There's
so many variables when it comes to war, and that's something that you stated literally right off the bat. Is that war and strategy, it's a moving part no matter what. Like, absolutely. That's something that you wouldn't even consider. I'm sure in the training they address something like that, similar to it, but when you're in that situation, you think that that's your ally, and it's really not. And
100%
takes the team down at the time. So a lot of people are probably trying to scramble to their weapons, and, to get adjusted to
absolutely.
it.
I mean, they're like, I think we weren't there. I think they were playing soccer in the field inside the base, just kind of shooting the shit, right? Lunchtime, whatever. Like the platoon leader and whoever else is with the unit is in there talking with the generals of that base, and kind of like having tea and talking about, this is what we're going to do next. That was the time in the war where the status of forces agreement, the SOFA agreement, was getting signed. which means that we were going to be taking a type of a back seat to the Iraqi military being the point in all the future operations. It was part of that, part of those discussions. I think it happened shortly thereafter.
So after this first fight, you were in the military for 4 years, and that would be what, 2 deployments? Deployments typically like a year.
Yeah, there was 12 months deployment at the time. I only did 1 deployment because I could have gone to the second deployment, but I was so close to getting ETSing that I had the choice to re-enlist just for the duration of the deployment or to stay, or to leave the Army. So I could have done 2 deployments, but it also depends on how much they're rotating the unit. So because in the beginning of the war, they were doing such, high tempos of deployments back to back, like they were doing 15 months deployment, you'd get dwell time for 3 months, be home for 3 months, and then go back on another 15. And by the time I went, the Army realized that this is not a good way to rotate soldiers into combat, which they implemented more like heavy recruiting efforts. I mean, that's when the Army of One campaign came out. You remember Be All You Can Be, all that type of stuff, all that good marketing.
So you were pretty much like right on the cusp of that change.
Exactly. So by the time I was there, the Army had implemented a mandatory 1-year dwell time per deployment. So when you deploy, you come back, you stay home for a year. Then you redeploy if needed.
That probably assists with assessing your own PTSD that stems from war, and there's a little bit more focus on mental health understanding at that point. So I'm sure there's some other reasons to that. That's
the mental health focus came late for the Army. It's actually kind of shameful, but they're not going to want you to hear about this. And they'll say they tried everything, but I've got my own personal opinions about that. But I think the dwell time has a lot to do with that. It has a lot to do with the dynamic of soldiers coming home to their families. Excuse me. And what that transition out of combat mode back into being at home mode is, and you can't achieve that peacefully or cleanly or efficiently or effectively in a 3-month time frame. You have to regulate a person to snap out of the mindset and get out of the habit that you just spent an entire year, which included a high level of stress and a high level of vigilance because it was centered around survival in a sense. And you have to turn that off, and it takes time to unwind. And they finally realized that and said, you're non-deployable for a year. You stay home for a year, and then your unit goes back on the rotation.
And knowing that you're only going to be home for 3 months, that's going to be constantly a cloud that's just hovering over your mind. It's like, fuck, I have to go back to this, you know, and people will begin to reconsider if they even want to go back. And that obviously can hurt their temperament and kind of their confidence within their own fighting skills or whatever it translates to whatever position that they're in out there.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of variables to that. It's hard to come home and to be in a house, to go back to a house where you were making the rules before. And for 1 year, your children have been listening to mom, and mom's doing things by herself, and things are different and things don't work out. There's a high level of stress with that. There's a level of pent up aggression that you have coming home and having to deal with that because, quite frankly, it's annoying. And one of my favorite things about deploying is not having to deal with the bullshit that I had to deal with on a regular basis at home. My personal life, other people's personal life, other people's emotions, my emotions. I don't got to deal with them when I'm deployed. My whole mentality, my psyche is there, right there where I am in this shitty desert with a bunch of these guys. And we're going out and we're working every day, sometimes 13, 14 hours a day. Sometimes we're gone for 2 or 3. You know what I mean? And I'm not worried about, how anybody else is feeling back home. I'm focused on this.
Yep. And being in the military, it's you're literally living in that moment because you have to. Whereas like when you come back to civilian life, there's so much time to overthink. You're thinking about your future, thinking about your past, thinking about what your wives are doing, your kids are doing. Like there's so much mental scrambling that is associated with being home.
Absolutely. And I mean, yes, definitely thinking what your wives are doing, right? Like I'm not married still. I'm about to be, but I'm not married. And when I deployed, that wasn't a big overhanging thing. But there are guys who, they're getting emails and they're getting letters like, hey, by the way, when you come back, I got divorce papers to sign for you. Like that shit happens all the time. And then those guys now are not as mission capable as they were because their head's all fucked up. Dear John, the Dear John letters, that's a real thing. Right. And so a lot of military families during those deployments, especially when you're talking about 15-month, 12-month deployments, you're talking about you got to give credit to the families and to the wives who can stick it out and who are strong enough to make it, because that's a tough thing to do. It's a tough thing to go through.
So on the contrary of you having to fulfill this kind of situation of being home and then going back out into Iraq, once you left the military, you knew that you weren't coming back. What was that transition like for you mentally? And yeah, we'll just say mentally.
Here's my story about leaving the military. I was actually planning on staying in. I had a very bright future in the military. I became a sergeant at the very first opportunity that I could. I won like Soldier of the Cycle, Soldier of the Year, Soldier of the Quarter awards. Like I was squared away. I had a bright future in the military. I had a potential special forces position lined up because I took my defense language proficiency test in Hebrew because I speak and read Hebrew fluently. So the Army kind of gives you an extra like $200 a month if you take this test, and you get a passing score, a perfect score, right? Depending on the score is how much you get paid extra, and then now you're qualified to do other jobs that involve foreign languages, mostly intelligence. Some of them, for every special forces unit, they require you to learn another language. So I took this test. And I had to go report back to the testing area. That's some testing center on my base. And I went and got my result in an envelope. Nice, cool. Got a 3.3, which is a perfect score for Hebrew. And then there was like an old special forces colonel with his green beret on. He was a lieutenant colonel, and he asked for me to come to his office, and he spoke with me, and he said that he saw my results. They're looking for Hebrew speakers right now to be recruited for a special operations group, and asked me if I'm interested. And I said, I'll definitely listen to it. This is after Iraq, by the way. And we went through the motions, la-da-da-da-da. I already kind of knew the spiel. And then he asked me if I have security clearance. I told him, I knew that they required like the utmost security clearance. I told him that I don't have that one. Obviously he asked me some of the questions revolving around that. I told him that I was an Israeli citizen. I'm a dual citizen. And then he asked me if I'm willing to renounce my citizenship to be eligible for the clearance. And that was kind of like nah, I'm not going to do that. That's kind of not what I'm trying to do. So
what was the reasoning behind that? Why would you have to denounce it to take that position?
The United States government does not allow you to have above top secret clearance if you are a citizen of another country.
Oh, national security
reasons, right? So for those reasons, I disqualified myself for not agreeing to renounce. That's just a personal thing. I don't have any plans to renounce my Israeli citizenship. My children, when they're born, if they ever are gonna have Israeli citizenship. It's my identity. It's my family's history. So that question is off the table. But what really happened was my dad had a stroke when I was coming back from Iraq, and he was having a tough time. And I was trying to bring him to be my dependent in the Army. Like if you're married, your wife is your dependent in the military. Your children are your dependents, and then you can bring them to live with you, and you get housing off post if you want to, and like you're an adult by yourself. But I was a single soldier. I was living in the sergeant's barracks, and had an elderly father who had a stroke, and I needed to take care of him. And I did all of the paperwork, exception to policy, started doing the bureaucracy thing. And it kind of went all the way up to the top, and I got almost every signature needed except for the post commander, who is usually a full bird colonel or a 1-star general, and he kind of makes those decisions. And he basically told me that the conversation is not going to continue unless I re-enlist, without any guarantee of whether or not they're going to allow my dad to come and be my dependent, right? And then he said essentially we're not going to set the precedent of bringing a parent as a dependent to Hawaii, as opposed to a soldier who has his wife and children. They take precedence. So that whole political thing coupled with hey, if you re-enlist, then we can see what we can do about it. And I mean,
it's a we'll see.
I wasn't trying. Iffy, yeah. I just got done with a year-long deployment. You know what I mean? It wasn't a vacation, and I'm coming back, and you expect the Army to try and accommodate one thing, but then you have the support of your entire chain of command, and And, we'll think about it if you re-enlist. Ask any veteran who's ever been exposed to that situation, that if you re-enlist, is always a thing.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard some horror stories from some people as well because of that. So anytime something's on the fringe of that, and that's not even just military, just life decisions that are iffy, it's all about taking that leap of faith, but it's not always the right decision at the end of the day. So you got to evaluate it, and you made the most sincere decision, and then you decided to leave. And did you have an idea at that point on what you wanted to do once you left the military?
No idea. But I did know that I got the GI Bill, so if I wanted to go to college, I can go to college, which was cool. Wasn't really my plan. I would have actually enjoyed staying in the military, but also the military was changing. I got out in 2013, and by that point, like all of this, no hazing, kinder, gentler army started really trickling in. It was right after Obama's reelection, and the real changes were coming in. So basically that kind of killed the whole dynamic of a wartime army. It changed drastically. The missions changed, the purpose of deployments changed. They turned them into advise and assist roles instead of combat roles. So there was all of this politics that was trickling down into the military during a time of war. The SOFA agreement that I mentioned last time, and all these different regulations, the rules of engagement changes. They changed the ROE so that you could not engage with an enemy unless they fired on you first. So I can see a guy 50 meters in front of me loading up an RPG and pointing it at me, but until he shoots it, I cannot engage him, right? Like, think about that. Think of how many soldiers got killed
that after racked up the casualties.
Yeah, because they didn't want to go to Fort Leavenworth for war crimes. That's the type of shit that I was like, nah, the Army's changing. I mean, also at the same time, I had, I was doing training with at this point, I was already a sniper team leader. I was doing training with my snipers, and, some young private that wasn't even in my platoon, like, knocked over a bunch of my sniper rifles the day I just got done on a 10-hour range, zeroing my scopes at, 1,200 meters. And now I got to go do all that over again. So I took them out back and I smoked them. And that's what people would call hazing. But, I just spent a whole day on the range and a lot of effort into making my precision optics be precise, point of aim, point of impact at over a kilometer. And now I got to do it all over again because some young private was horse playing around and knocked over 3 of my rifles. So big pain in my ass, you know what I mean? And so I took him out back and started pushing, started doing low crawls, da-da-da-da-da. And, this was at the time when the change was really coming down. And, my company commander, who was a captain, saw it. But normally officers don't get involved in discipline of the enlisted. It's very separated in that way. He saw me doing it, and he ran in and he grabbed some E7, some sergeant first class who outranked me, and basically told him to tell me to stop hazing this soldier if I want to keep my stripes on my chest. And I was like, well, sir, sergeant first class, I'm not hazing this soldier. He just, completely fucked up my sniper rifles, and I guarantee you he's not going to do it again. And they said, we don't care. If you keep hazing the soldier, we're taking the stripes off your chest. Make him write an essay. And those were the words. Those were the words that sealed the deal for me. Well, and from as far as I understand it right now, the whole essay thing is a big deal now. So they're trying to make dumb dudes more scholastic instead of stronger. I like making them strong.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's just a personal thing. He ain't going to not do that again from writing an essay, but he will not do that again if, his body hurts for 2 days and he shits himself.
Yeah. Tough is always so hard to handle and to understand and it's not even just the military. It's just, as humans, I think it's on a evolutionary level. We're just very resistant to change because we've learned these different ways. So sometimes those kind of things will just be like, all right, I'm gonna go on with what I need to do.
Sure. It was more of a values thing. It was more of a philosophical thing. It's not necessarily about resisting change. I'm open to change. I'll adapt to change. Right. But at the end of the day, I believe that if you are an infantryman in the United States Army, if you're a combat armed soldier, your purpose in life is to be lethal. You are not on the battlefield to write an essay. You're on the battlefield to kill an enemy. That is what you do. That is what you're supposed to do. And part of the whole dynamic of being in a large group of men who unequivocally follow this code that is ingrained in you from your first day in basic training, is that mindset is a powerful tool for you to successfully achieve what your purpose is in this giant machine that is the military. If you want to do that to an office worker, yeah, the office worker messed up, he can write an essay. You want to do it to the mechanic? Sure, do it to the mechanic. He can write an essay. But young buck over here, who's supposed to be, fighting, actually really fighting, should not be writing your essay.
Yeah, well, change generally starts with on a philosophical level
Sure.
or an ideation, and then it's translated down into action. So you basically saw what was happening before, while it was still in the beginning phases of this action.
Yeah.
You decided it wasn't for you.
Exactly.
And to move on.
And it was a good decision because it's completely changed the dynamic of the military now. I've still got plenty of friends who are in, and I hear their stories, and it is what it is. There's nothing they can do, and you do the best with what you got. But it's a generally it's a paradigm shift in the military. And you know what? Other countries aren't doing this. Our biggest adversaries, the most fierce other militaries on this planet, do not do that. Look at the Russian army. Look at the Chinese army, right? Look at what the Iranians are doing. Look at the North Korean army. You think any of those guys are writing essays? No.
Yeah. Well, I did see it. It sounds like at least from the Obama standpoint, because we're going back to 2012 when this was beginning to happen, is Obama was scrutinized a lot for the drone strikes and a lot of the killing with drones. And so maybe that's kind of their focus, is they're trying to preserve American lives by doing something that was maybe still considered a war crime by using drones and less man capital and more just mechanical power to go and terminate these enemies.
Yeah, but how many innocent civilians were killed from those drone strikes, right?
I believe is like in the thousands.
Probably in the hundreds of thousands. We're talking about daily, multiple strikes per day. Now, I'm not saying, call in the infantry instead, because if you're talking about a ground assault, then that's a whole lot more moving pieces. Was it cheaper? Sure. You know what I mean? Did it cost less American lives? Absolutely. And that's extremely important. But, when you're indiscriminately carpet bombing cities, you're not going to get the same precision as you would putting your actual people who are trained and seasoned in fighting to accomplish the mission. So, there's a lot of controversy around the drone strikes, Obama's drone strikes.
Yeah.
There was thousands and thousands of strikes, and there was just a lot of unnecessary death that came from that. You have
and it didn't even come out till later, till he was out of office.
Of course it didn't. That's how it always goes, right? Why would anybody want to publish that? Why would anybody want to celebrate that? At the end of the day, we didn't even accomplish the mission. Syria is still a mess. You know what I mean? ISIS didn't get taken care of until 2018. So, we're talking, and I remember when I saw 2014, it was in June of 2014. I was leaving my shooter for my sniper team. I was leaving his wedding, and I was in the airport, and I was watching the news, and I was having a beer, and I saw a video of ISIS in my base in Tikrit, in Cobb Spiker, taking all of the Iraqi military that were there, and they were just bullet to the head, throwing them in the river, line them up like cattle. And I heard that, when ISIS went into Tikrit, they took my base, Cobb Spiker, which also had an airfield on it. They took that base in a day. 1,700 Iraqi soldiers took off their uniforms and laid down their weapons, and every single one of them was executed. You know what I mean? And that right there, that ISIS, the reason why ISIS is a thing is because of the way that we left Iraq. It was the way that the drawdown happened right before Barack Obama's election in 2012. It was a huge talking point. I'm bringing the troops back home. I'm ending the war in Iraq. The Iraqi military was not ready. The Iraqi police was not ready. The Iraqi government was not ready for us to leave and not support them. And it created a huge power vacuum. And all of the sleepers who have been fighting and are now hardened by, at this point, it was 9 years of war, are now recirculating and recongregating, and they created the Islamic State because of it, because of politics. The U.S. military left Iraq, and ISIS was created as a direct result of the lack of our presence and support for the Iraqi security forces. That is exactly how that happened. Anybody who wants to contest that, I don't care if you work for the Pentagon, let's talk about it. That's really what happened. And I saw it, Operation New Dawn, which was what it was called, which is where the drawdown began, started at the end of my deployment. Yeah.
It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot to take in.
Yeah, it's crazy. And now at the Middle East, it's still, you don't hear much about ISIS in general, maybe because
they're mostly gone.
I was gonna say it's been factored off into multiple different smaller groups, or I'm not really sure what's happening down in that area.
President Trump actually launched multiple campaigns that did involve airstrikes, but they're a lot more precise. He also, his defense cabinet did some really solid strategic placement of, soldiers on the ground, and they were able to maintain. They were able to direct the offensive. The Kurds were a huge help in that, the Kurdish people. I don't know if you're familiar with the Kurds, but they're a small ethnic group that are kind of speckled around the Middle East, and they've been getting persecuted for a few thousand years. And in the 90s, Saddam Hussein, they live in northern Iraq and southern Syria. It used to be called Kurdistan, but the wars took it over. Saddam Hussein actually chemical bombed them in the 90s and killed a bunch of Kurdish people, and they've been fighting for their own survival for 150 years as it is. So they are like squared away. Iraqi soldiers and Iraqi policemen are like 12-year-olds with AK-47s. They are not professional. They don't care about training. They're not good, as far as it goes to keep your country free, right? But the Kurds, because they've had a life of defending themselves and basically stopping them from being genocided, are like some of the best soldiers in the area, in my opinion. So they're there still.
It's interesting. What is the persona like, or I guess the morale of, I guess we'll just say your squad, when you're out there fighting and the media is just pitching like we need to pull out of Iraq, we need to pull out of Afghanistan, like that counterculture media versus the military, when you're actually on the boots on the ground, you're out there fighting, why you're there, but yet everyone in America, or at least the campaign to get the president elected, is taking the complete opposite pitch. What was that like? What's that mentality like for all of the soldiers at that time?
It's frustrating. I mean, what's going on there. I mean, some of our engagements, some of our firefights, they made the news like globally. One of the events happened on the 29th of September at the Provincial Council building at Salahuddin, and I'll tell the story and I'll answer the question. My battalion commander, who was a lieutenant colonel at the time, he had a meeting with the whole local government of the province. So think of in Iraq, a province is like a state. So he was about to meet with like the governor, the secretary of state, like all the whole board of directors of that state, right? So he was going to meet with them. And as they were dismounting, I was on a mission in the city, like 3 blocks away when this happened. So we got the call and we right away stopped what we were doing and went to support them. Basically, this is our first fight with Al-Qaeda, with AQI, which they're not like any of the other groups. They're much better trained. They're sophisticated. They have better equipment, and all of them are ready to die. And that's a big, important factor about fighting, especially in an insurgency, especially through multiple groups, is like, are these people going to pop shots and run? Are they going to stand their ground while they can and then dip out? Or are they over here and they're going to fight until they die? AQI, Al-Qaeda, a majority of them, they go into this knowing that they're going to die, and most of them have suicide vests on them already just to kind of go out with a bang, for a lack of better words. So there was a bunch of Al-Qaeda guys who dressed up like Iraqi police, and they were already inside of the provincial council building playing security, strapped with suicide vests, la-da-da-da-da, right? My commander dismounts his truck, ready to go in here into the building for a meeting, and as he's trying to enter, 2 vehicle-borne IEDs, so improvised explosive device. It's cars that are just stocked with bombs. You drive them in, boom, they explode. 2 of them hit the building pretty much simultaneously, and it started what they called the siege on the provincial council building. It was a 3-story building, probably like 100 offices, maybe more. Had a ton of people in there. The two car bombs go off, knocks a couple guys out who just got out of the truck, but everyone's fine. Commander took some shrapnel, got a Purple Heart, like his 3rd one. No big deal to him. Some of the guys got incapacitated, but all of our guys who were there were fine. So we get the call. Actually, I believe we heard the explosions go off, and we got the call on the radio, like, 5 seconds later, they report it. So we just run over there and set in position. By the time we get there, there's Iraqi military and police who are already on site because it's a heavily guarded place, and they're already engaging. There's just a lot of chaos. And it ends up turning into it was like an 8-hour battle to get a foothold into that big ass building. What Al Qaeda did is they took the entire this is on you can check it out. You can go on Google and look at the Salahuddin Provincial Council attack. Well, it was misreported because I read a ton of those articles when they did come out, and I saw it with my own eyes, and it ain't what happened. Anyways, a lot of chaos. They killed the entire government of that state, lined them up in the boardroom, set them on fire, and shot them in the head. Classic Al Qaeda. And then they started turning on all the people in there, and there was like 11 or 9, I don't remember. There was a bunch of Al Qaeda guys in there, and they were just mowing down these people who were working for their state government. And this was around the time when we were supposed to be allowing the Iraqis to take point, and we were there to support. They are not squared away. There was a lot of chaos. People were jumping out of the 3rd story, trying to get out of there. The building caught fire. Every 45 minutes or so, one of the Al Qaeda guys would detonate a suicide vest just to kind of keep things going in tandem. Finally, after like 6 hours, they got a foothold into the first floor. A lot of action going on the first floor. And then at one point or another, probably by hour 7, the Iraqi military decided that they're no longer interested in fighting the Al Qaeda people, and they're just going to take the building down. So with people still in it, with an unknown amount of what the hell's going on in this giant government building, the Iraqi military decides that their course of action is going to be to shoot a volley of RPGs and rocket-propelled grenades and all types of munitions into the building just to stop the current situation.
They're just leveling everything.
The building was intact. I mean, it didn't crumble, but they killed everybody who was in there, whether they were Al Qaeda or not, because there was no urgency to retake the building with maintaining integrity internally. And it's just a testament to that's the Iraqi military. Those are people who are not there to fight. They're there to collect a paycheck and wear a uniform and feel cool having a gun. A majority of them have absolutely no business doing anything involving any type of combat or security. They don't have any national pride. They will not and choose not to die for their country. And they're doing it because they're getting paid, because the United States is now, funding the reconstruction of Iraq at this point. So that's what you get. And that's what we left Iraq with. We left Iraq with a military that thinks it's perfectly acceptable to load volleys of ordnance and destroy a building with their own countrymen inside of it in order to stop an attack. And that's something that would never happen in the U.S. It would never happen in a U.S.-led operation. It was a sickening and hard thing to watch. It was one of those situations where we were like, fuck all you guys, we'll go in there. But obviously I'm nobody. I'm just a dude on the ground. I don't get to none of us got to make decisions. We were all really, really frustrated with how that ended up. And I think a lot of us still are. I was talking to my best friend from Recon. His name is Steven Bursky. I was talking to him about a month ago. We talk every week, but he brought that thing up because the date just passed. And it was the first time I actually thought about it for a long time. And I'm like, dude, how fucked up is it when you're in that situation and you're engaging? There was action happening even outside the building. As Al Qaeda was taking this building, there's people in the neighborhoods around this building that are like, oh shit, they're fighting the Americans. Right there on the balcony, do whatever. They're not AQI guys though. The guys that were serious were in the building, and so that happens. And that gets on the news. Every major news outlet in the world covers this story, and everyone else is telling a different story. Every report is different. There's some major details that are being left out. This is not being talked about. That's not being talked about. And that is when I realized that every one of these, journalists or these editors, they have a certain narrative that they are trying to paint. They are actively, I don't know where they got their information. You know what I mean? But they definitely didn't get the right information.
They're pushing their own agenda.
It could have even been the government, you know, who knows? But there was a lot of inconsistencies. There's a lot of differences between them as well. It's not like all of the outlets were telling a false story and it was the same one. All of these things were being pushed in these certain ways. So that's when I realized that the media has so much power because they deliver this information as fact. And that is once that happened and I read all the articles, I actually saved them just so I can, you know, have them in my memory banks. And that's when I realized like, this ain't the story. I remember sitting with Bursky, like in Iraq in our little metal housing container that we lived in. And I'm like, who the fuck who wrote this? Why is this whole entire article not explaining the event that occurred? And that's when the real realization hit. And that's actually when I started getting really interested in politics. You know, the status of forces agreement got me interested. The decisions that were being made on the ground in terms of like high level politics, you know, like executive office initiatives for re-election type stuff. And so that's what really sparked my interest in being involved and being in the know with politics and with media, which is why I think the way that I do today about politics and media.
Interesting. When you guys had realized what was going on, did you ever approach your leading commander of your group about the situation and the misinformation that was going on?
Absolutely not.
No,
not my place.
Okay.
What is a guy like me who's working going to be doing to be like, oh yeah, let's call this major news corporation and tell them that they're wrong?
Yeah, I guess it can only backfire in so many different ways.
It's not even worth the ass pain. And then you're looked at like a whistleblower, and then you're not part of the team anymore. And there's all that dynamic that happens internally, right? It's like not your place. You know, that's
interesting. Yeah, I was thinking of that from a civilian standpoint, right? Like when you have frustrations with your boss or there's something that's going on where there's misinformation going on, you usually approach your boss and you're like, hey, are you aware this is going on about that? But when there's a completely different structure and so many different agendas being pushed,
yeah, I mean,
it's tough to understand.
At work, it's different. When you're talking about the U.S. government, then your approach is going to be completely different than what you would if, let's say, you were working at anywhere, even if it's a smaller corporation, right? Name a company that has about 500 employees in Las Vegas, Hakkasan Group, right? You know, you can definitely be like, hey, by the way, here's an article. This ain't what happened, la-da-da-da-da, and that'll go fine. But when you're talking about even your commander, even your chain of command, you got to think about the way that looks. You're talking about, I'm over here at the very bottom of the barrel. I am a lower enlisted member in the infantry who would be reporting to a lieutenant on the platoon level, who is reporting to a captain on the company level, who is reporting to a lieutenant colonel on the battalion level, who is reporting to a full bird colonel on the brigade level, to a general on the division level, through multiple generals that go all the way up through the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the Pentagon Department of Defense that would then go to the president.
So yeah, we're talking about like a 20, 30 person chain ladder.
It wouldn't even make it past brigade level. You know, it's because the brigade commander knows this is completely outside of the scope of what I'm supposed to do. And like, I don't care about a news article because we're fighting a war.
It's the compartmentalization of the military.
Totally. It doesn't matter. Like, we are independent of the media when you're in the military. The media says all types of shit, and the Army has their own PR team and their civil affairs division that they handle all of that stuff anyways. But for a firefight that was misreported, that's definitely not. I mean, here I am. I'm telling the truth.
Yeah,
the media lies, guys.
It's good to understand that. I think that's also what's brought into the fruition of independent journalism and things like podcasting or independent YouTube channels and different things like that. And obviously they can spread their own misinformation.
Sure, I mean,
but people have begun to notice more recently. I guess it's always been noticed. Noam Chomsky wrote a book about this in the 90s, but with the rise of social media, people are able to point out things much quicker that there is misinformation being spread about something.
That's one way to look at it, I think. I think that social media is complicit in all of this. I think that media in general, the media, I guess you can call it, all of it, every single bit of information that's on a mainstream source, whether it's left-leaning, right-leaning, or centrist, I believe that it's propaganda. There is no more actual, real journalism happening on a mainstream level
Is
here.
it because everyone holds their own bias because of that?
Everyone holds their own bias, and obviously everybody who is reporting something has some agenda in making you feel a certain way in the style that they write and the words that they choose and the way that they structure those things. It's all leading for you to maybe feel like you're finding your own conclusion, but you've been led down that path anyways. I think that long lost are the days when people would look at multiple sources, always question their credibility, and try to make that decision on their own. And I think that, we can argue philosophy here, like, what is the truth? What is the truth? Right.
That's something that's been hyper blended, and you hear the focus is what is your truth? That is actually the phrase you hear a lot of.
Your truth is your opinion, right? That's what I believe. When you say I'm just speaking my truth, right? Like, let's say I throw a baseball. And you're walking right into the path of where I threw my baseball, and the baseball ends up making contact with you. Your truth is that I hit you with a baseball. My truth is that I threw a baseball and you walked into the flight path of the baseball and were hit by it.
So it's what frame are you looking?
Exactly. It's all about perspective, right? So your truth is your truth because it's truly what happened to you. And my truth is my truth because that's truly what happened to me. So what is the truth here, right? What is the truth in this baseball scenario?
It's true.
The truth is that I threw a ball, you were walking, and the ball hit you. Okay?
Yep. This is exactly... you mentioned this when you walked up to that you listened to the interview with Scott Lane, the recent one, and he calls this loophole media.
Loophole media.
Media.
That's 99.999% of that media is nowadays. People, what they're doing is they're finding somebody who emulates a train of thought that they can relate to. I like the way this guy thinks. I'm going to listen to him, and I'm going to take his opinions or her opinions as my own. And it's happening in a way that's very, very polar, and it's become tribal. Right? Like on both sides. And I'm talking specifically about left and right in this situation.
Yeah,
because
Fox and CNN.
That's where the media has gone. Well, it's Fox News on the right, and it's CNN, ABC, MSNBC, and all these other.
Everyone else technically
is a lot more left leaning, right? Yeah. And Fox is also extremely right leaning, and even Fox News, like their news hosts also are propagating things in the way that they're presenting facts and the way that they're communicating with it and the emotion that they're trying to make you feel with how they do it. This is a formula. This is an art form, right? So you gain followers because you're telling people what they want to hear, and they like the way that you're saying it, and they like where your head's at. Like, I agree with that. Like, that's my style. I like that, right? Tucker Carlson or Laura Ingraham or Rachel Maddow or, Don Lemon or whoever you pick on the spectrum, all of those people are little cult leaders, and they are preaching these things, which they are preaching as fact. What they're doing is they're taking information and they're manipulating it in many ways to make you feel a specific way, probably make you feel angrier than you should be about it or make it look like a bigger deal than it is. I like to think that a majority of Americans are much more similar than they are different in almost every way. Some fundamental values and some things that we believe can be very different, but overall, in terms of being a human being who lives in this country and goes to work and wants to live and let live and does all these things, a majority of us are kind of like not combative about politics for the most part, right?
It's true. Yeah. That's where all the retweets and things on certain posts, and you see that maybe this one tweet gets 10,000 retweets, but that's only 10,000 people out of 330 million people in the entire country, so it's actually like, it seems like it's a big deal, but for many people, it's really not. And you can see that with even the lack of voter turnout, even though voter turnout now is on like a historic rate, which is amazing to see.
And we're here talking about voter turnout. By the time this gets aired, the next president was probably going to be elected, right? So that's crazy.
We'll see. At this point, I saw that Texas was like 6 times the turnout at this point than it was last year. And there's some other ones.
The early voting turnout has been ridiculous, which is huge. This is by far the most important election in any of our lifetimes, I think, because of how polarized it is.
Yeah, because it's the search for truth, right? Like we're talking about what is the truth, the story that you told me most recently, I forgot what the name was, about the bombings. That's the actual truth because you saw it. But in order to find that truth, you have to do hours and hours of digging to actually find what it was. And you have to come across the person who was there, who saw it, and doesn't have some sort of a bias towards it, right? Because you're, like you said, you're just a grunt on the ground. You don't have a relation to wherever the media is because you have nowhere to go with the information or anybody to sway. So I found the truth to this story, but it's like, I didn't know it was going to come across it. It took some conversation to dig to it. So it takes hours and hours to find the truth. And today people just don't have the time, or they just don't care. Like Twitter now, in order to retweet an article, you actually have to open the article for them to show it.
I mean, the whole thing with Twitter and Facebook, all the stuff that they're doing, I think it's extremely alarming.
It is. I do agree with Trump on this side that if they want to censor certain things, then they should be considered an editorial.
It's a great example. Like, why is Donald Trump getting censored and getting his tweets taken down and his account locked when the Ayatollah of Iran is saying death to America repeatedly and nobody bats an eye? Like, there's a lot of different stuff here. There's a ton of hypocrisy. The truth is that I am outside of that realm. I look at it on many different angles, and I do not prescribe to those ideologies. I have my own philosophy about how I feel about politics and how I feel about what's going on in the country. And a lot of it has to do with things that I've seen for myself or actual logical association with X, Y, and Z. Obviously everyone's truth is different. We all have a story. Whoop-de-doo. I can sit here and give you my sob story. You can do the same. And every single person here in America can do that. I think the biggest problem is that now social media has allowed us to, force that voice out. There is now an outlet for everybody to cry to, for everybody to express themselves on. Normally it would be like, that's great, that's your opinion, good for you. Now it's tribalism. Now it's fall in line with this narrative, fall in line with the rhetoric, or you don't belong. And it's coming to the point where families aren't talking to each other, people aren't friends anymore. There's a point where people just believe that you're a bad person because you don't prescribe to the ideologies that they've consumed.
I think to even go along those lines, the term virtue signaling now is people will come after you for not acknowledging a situation happen and presenting your opinions on it.
Absolutely.
Which is outlandish to think, because if you want to hold your opinions in internally, you shouldn't have to say it out loud to signal where your belief is on some sort of situation.
Yeah, and it's created a need for validation, right? That's another big thing about social media. It's about echo chambering and saying this message that is on point with the rest of the group, so that you are getting your likes and you're getting validated. It's like posting a picture up on Instagram. If you don't get enough likes within a couple hours, then you're taking it down. Like that's a thing. And those are things that are actually hitting people's needs emotionally. They're getting emotional satisfaction. It is scientifically proven that, being on your phone and getting gratification through doing something not only elevates your self-esteem, but it releases serotonin in your brain. So we're actually, at this point, we're addicted to our phones. We're addicted to social media. We are less, connected to one another as in person, and we're more connected to the hive online to get that gratification that we would normally be getting through social settings when we're interacting with other people. And, usually you'd be with people that are of a similar mind to you and have a similar background to you. You guys all grew up in the same neighborhood, the friends you used to play outside with. You know what I mean? You remember all those kids. You guys all had the same hobbies and the same likes because you grew up under the same circumstances. And, you wouldn't know what the kid from New Jersey feels like because he grew up in those circumstances that were wicked awesome. And you're over here saying, dope, bro, or however it is, right? Now, everything's up on everywhere, sensationalized. This also goes with news and information. And one train of thought that gets traction and goes viral now becomes the truth or a truth, right? It is now a form of truth.
Yeah, it gets put up on that pedestal for a lot of people to resonate with it.
Because it's been validated, with 300,000 retweets, and that is the new fact. That is the new law. And I think that's dangerous. That's like 1984 Orwell stuff.
Yeah, it's dystopian.
It is dystopian. Core. Merriam-Webster changed the definition to preference after it was used by Amy Coney Barrett about referring to sexual preference. I actually saw this on Twitter. This guy used the Wayback app where you can check a website, but what it was a couple months ago. And he saw that on the same day that it was used, they changed the definition for the word, sexual preference to be an offensive term that disregards, like binary or non-binary gender, sexuality classifications and things like that. And I mean, who the hell is going to change the dictionary to back up a narrative, which is absolutely ridiculous.
It seems like the political ideologies are starting to bleed into everything, and not just the politicians who used to push it all the time, or the corporate CEOs who had the bias to save money or whatever the case is. And now every single person or somebody who runs something has nothing to do with politics, like a toaster company. Now they're the ones that have to comment on what their beliefs are for BLM, even though it has nothing to do with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just not to lose the business, right? It's groupthink. And it's information control, and it's people control is what it really comes down to. Because if you're able to sway public opinion, then you're also able to manipulate public behavior. And that's a very powerful thing to do. And I have a background in marketing. My degree is in marketing, which is the actual science of manipulating consumer behavior. So if I'm looking at things from a technical standpoint, I'm looking at how this information is being brought up, and then you're following up on the behavior of people who do consume it. I mean, you can definitely see a difference between somebody who is being influenced by the stimuli that they're receiving from all of these different types of engagement, which, there's people taking notes. It is their job to analyze this type of stuff and to create profiles and to, this is data that's worth
the data
millions
scrapers,
and billions of dollars, right? This is what they want. So now they're able to stimulate you via your phone or via the television, or there's a whole library of things to be able to manipulate the way that you behave and the way that you perceive and the way that you believe things. And that is dangerous, because who controls that information, right? What is the truth now?
It's media warfare.
I mean, it's information warfare, media. I mean, media at this point is the fourth branch of the government. It
really is.
The media has that power to basically put somebody in office or take them out of office, or have the people turn against their leaders, or vice versa.
Yeah, I actually just watched a documentary on Robert Ailes, who was the founder and creator of Fox News, and it's discussed and showed the backdoor kind of thinking of how he put Trump in office and favored a lot of these politicians and started a lot of the Obama propaganda behind not having a U.S. passport and where he was born, and why he always emphasized Hussein in the middle, and all it comes from both sides of thinking.
Sure.
But it shows that one person can have this much power and sway things in different directions, and not even just elections, but depending on even a local level, like a local newspaper has a lot of power. I actually saw a bunch of reports of these small towns in America that don't have a local newspaper. And a lot of these politicians have been in power for 20, 30 years, and they've just been siphoning money from their local government because there's no newspapers to report on it.
That's insane. It's 2020. Like, who even reads a newspaper anymore?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
so if there's nobody able to report anything or to even provide, and able to show just their frame of thinking and to use that as a reference. Like, I guess in this line of thinking, it's better to have one person with a bias presenting information than no information at all.
Sure. Or, I guess presenting information. Absolutely. At the end of the day, you should be relying on a non-biased source. Let's, take any event, right? A fire happened at building 1. You know what I mean? Normally there would be a report made by the fire department that said, this is what we believe occurred. It was an electrical fire, la-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And that information, especially when it's from a public entity, is also made to the public. So you can get that at the source, and you can see that, okay, I can make my decision on this. Or, look at the police report. It ended up being arson, right? I mean, we can go off hypotheticals for days, but at the end of the day, that control of information is really is the biggest thing. And we can get into that because there's plenty of more Alex Jones type shit I can talk about on this show.
Speaking of Alex Jones, just was on Joe Rogan's show a few days ago. That's super funny. But just going back to even the very beginning, I can see your fascination from the tides of political power and kind of the the upper level structure and thinking of how it ties from military and politics and back and forth.
Yeah, seeing it from multiple levels really, for me personally, created some clarity. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm not biased, because I don't believe anybody can be unbiased. I'm basing my opinions and my decisions that I make about the information that I consume off of my experience. Like, I've seen this before, I've experienced that before. This may not be exactly what it's trying to be, or what is this author, or what is this journalist trying to make me believe? What are they trying to make me feel? Like, what's the point of this article? Is it just to inform me, or are they actually have an agenda to persuade me? You know, a lot of the content that's out, and by a lot, I mean overwhelmingly, is persuasive. They're painting a picture of certain events and certain people in a way that may or may not, you know, necessarily be truthful, or spinning an event that is definitely taken out of context or has been embellished. That happens quite a lot, and you see it because it's easy to manipulate technology and video clips and things like that, and be able to cut out one part of a comment without the follow-up or the full extension of it. They've done this with Trump, and they've done it with Obama as well, and with Joe Biden. You know what I mean? They've done it with every political figure, and I think it's a power thing. Having that power to manipulate and to persuade public opinion is power. And in general, you know, people, human beings, they're not the type of people who don't want power. There's a huge power dynamic just on a primal level with being a human being, and having that power made available to you. You know, people are dicks. They have power, and they are going to abuse it because they have an agenda that they want to achieve. Now, are the intentions, are the intentions behind their agenda something that can be viewed as overall honorable by a large portion of the population? For some points, yes, and for some points, no. You know, I mean, it's the control of information, and it's how it's being displayed, how it's being consumed, and how it's being sensationalized by our new social habits as humans with a huge connection and reliance on technology. I know, I'm sorry, bro. This is supposed to be army talk.
I love that. No, it's once you get out of that controlled structure, right? It's like the first time you move out of your parents' house and you realize that you've been babied in a sense, and now you have to take on all of these different responsibilities. It's the same as just leaving the military. Now you have new responsibilities, but you have insight from a different place that isn't your parents' house as well, and how things are controlled, and how the world is outside of the US, and what people are really thinking. And now you see something that the majority of Americans don't see, which is the events that are happening and how the media actually paints it out to be, when it's actually the complete opposite.
Absolutely. My advice is take everything with a grain of salt. Look at multiple sources, try and find independent people that are reporting, same thing that Scott said, like stream reporting. You're there, right now. You can see what's happening right now. You can make your decision without anybody telling you, this is what happened.
Yep.
This is what is happening. So slippery slope, man. Slippery slope.
Well, there's something that we didn't even get to talk about. Your whole entrepreneurial journey is something that we could talk on for a long time. And I want to get briefly into it, because to show your great amount of integrity, but the line of thinking, it shows that you're able to step outside of the box and see different things. You are the president of AVGear, but when I had first met you, when you came into the fraternity, you were actually running something that was called Watch Me Rave. Yeah. That was my first, one of my first little projects. It's entrepreneurial talk. Okay. That's actually a good segue from our previous conversation, because the military and the structured mindset did help me a lot with my entrepreneurship, organization, being able to break things down in a way that I was taught in the Army, like task, purpose, execution. What is my task? What am I doing it for? How do I do it? Right? Like there's very by the numbers, step 1, step 2, step 3 things that you learn in the military, because that's how they train you from day one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is how you do it. This is how you enter and clear a building. This is how you, unload and reload an M4 rifle. This is, It's all by the numbers. It's for stupid people. It is so the dumbest person ever can understand how to do it, especially if there's somebody who's done it before there to train you. I'm not saying y'all are stupid, but you know who you are. A lot of us are.
It's okay.
It's interesting. I actually had a gentleman on here who was also a military veteran. His name's Christian Jones, and he founded Elation, which is the local trans company out here.
Yeah.
And I see this happening fairly often, where veterans they find solace in electronic music after the military. What do you think it is about it that kind of gravitated you towards that industry?
I mean, at the time that I got out in 2012 was kind of like when the electronic music boom happened, right? You know, we got some stuff when I was in Iraq, like the new Skrillex album dropped and everybody was crazy about that. And I was like, dude, I spent a year in the desert and the entire music scene has changed when I got back. So by the time I got out, you know, I got out of, when I left Iraq and came back, you know, I was still a soldier, still living on base, but those things were kind of like more heavily in the sphere of your, you know, going out and being in society and socializing, like the music is playing. And I kind of liked it. I liked the beat. I liked the music. I liked the scene. I enjoyed, you know, large format. Basically the music itself had a calming nature to it in some ways. Some of it was super relevant. Like, there was an artist named Feed Me who made this song called One Click Headshot.
Yep.
And the guy was like, my hands are shaking, you still can't get me. Boom, headshot, boom, headshot. Yeah, and I was like, oh, that's awesome.
Headshot.
So I remember even like playing that on and cleaning my rifle with my sniper team and being like, this is one of our anthems, you know. So it kind of got integrated into the culture. There's the high intensity stuff that I was really digging. It was meshed well with the vibe of soldiering in some way, shape, or form. You know, heavy bass, crazy sounds, and, you know, high tempo. And that's kind of where I got started with it, where I started getting involved with the music. And then when I got out of the Army, my best friend, Austin, who was also kind of like getting into the rave scene and into the, you know, I was 22, 23 years old, and I just spent the last 4 years of my life in the military and not doing the stuff that an 18 to 23-year-old person does. So I was ready to get back out, and I was ready to party, and I was ready to, like, you know, unleash the suppression of my youth that had been put in from the military in not a bad way. I'm very thankful for that because it did help shape my path, and it gave me the discipline to be able to, like, oh, okay, so here's some cool ideas. You know, Austin brought it to the table. He had some of his friends that were already kind of working on the project, and they kind of brought me into the loop a little bit. Before I even kind of joined the company, it was barely even starting, but I kind of put some stuff together that were like pretty simple, straightforward, logical, you know, run-of-the-mill standard sales approaches on how to sell these Watch Me Rave watches, which
they're so dope though.
They're pretty so dope. It's just it's a watch. For those of you who don't know, Watch Me Rave is no longer in existence, but it is a watch that when you hit the button, it's a LED light show goes on. So it's like a cool accessory for ravers who are like buying, you know, costumes and all types of different stuff to dress up to go to raves. Yeah.
Now there's tons of them, but back then there weren't.
We were the only one.
Yeah. They were the only one.
Yeah. We were, you know, trendsetters. But yeah, so, it kind of turned into, you know, they bootstrapped this thing with a few $1,000s and ordered a bunch of these watches. And then we started with the branding and with the website, and we started doing events at the Hustler Strip Club. Every Sunday.
Fun times, open bar, baby, 8 to 12.
We got a deal with them. They let us use their second floor or their rooftop to do parties there every Sunday. So we'd, like, our friends were DJs, and we'd get them in there, and they'd set up, and we'd give away like these watches, and the turnout was awesome. People were like super stoked. And we got an open bar for everybody. Like, who doesn't want free alcohol at a strip club on a Sunday night? And then we started doing some bigger events. We took the rooftop and did like the big, massive rave that had, like, you know, 1,500 people on the top of this strip club. And that was before they even renovated it. Now, if any of you dogs go to Hustler, I think that kind of inspired the renovation because we showed them what we can do, and they were happy to, you know, let us come in. The bartenders were making money, and everybody was happy. Yeah, so it kind of turned into this event and like an e-commerce type of e-tail for rave gear, and it kind of folded on over itself, and we started expanding and doing some subscriptions, and it was pretty good. It was a fun first project. I definitely learned a lot. The business didn't make it. We had some issues internally between the partners.
It's always what cripples companies.
It's always what cripples them. But, you know, we were young anyways, and you know, every one of us had our strength, and every one of us had some weaknesses, and either way, it was a great learning experience. Regardless, it kind of set the foundation. you learn some valuable lessons, like, what to not do, and what you can do better, and, who you do and don't want to do business with, and, how to set up contracts or do supply chains. It's about like going through the experience and trying to absorb as much of what you're doing as possible. And for me, when I do that, I always look at my past experience and say, how can I apply something similar to what I've already done and modify it and mold it a little bit and customize it to fit what I'm doing right now in a way, shape, or form. And that tool for me has been pretty, it's been pretty good for my ideation and my execution on a lot of ideas that I'm working on currently, and successful ideas that I've done in the past.
Yeah, you're building a specific knowledge to yourself where you eventually go do something down the road that is so specific to you that nobody else can replicate it because of all your experiences and skills that you've stacked along this
definitely
magnificent journey.
If anything, it's the organizational skills, I think, that I'll attribute most of my success, because of the way that I have a way of mapping things. Just like I explained the task, purpose, execution, I have a way of, brainstorming and putting thoughts down on paper and expanding on those thoughts and crossing them off. And it's a really messy situation at first. The system that I use, that I kind of adopted from the military and kind of made it my own. And it's just a system of organization to break things up into step by step, or into, just think of like a tree chart. Main idea, 3 sub ideas, 3 for each of those. Go down, and then each one of those you have a different, like a possible outcome or a possible way to accomplish, right? And you keep on doing it. It involves research, a lot of Googling involved, a lot of looking at what other people have done or are doing, and seeing how you can modify it to keep the idea original. Or, you end up getting an idea, competition in this particular point is way too big, I can scrap that from this idea entirely. And it really is about compartmentalization and then expansion on each point, so that you have the most amount of information and knowledge and tools in order to accomplish each individual task for a larger frame of goal.
I could see how the military thinking just trickles in there.
Yeah, totally.
Compartmentalization specific. And it's very similar to kind of my entrepreneurial journey as well, where you were talking about building specific knowledge and allocating these different skills and using them to kind of morph into something more spectacular that only you can do.
Sure. Yeah.
Later in life. And it's interesting. You could take so many different disciplines that you've done through your life. You take the military, and then it's like raving, and now you're into AVGear and whatever the next thing is. Somebody's going to be like, what? How did this guy get here? but you've been thinking about it in here for this entire time, and you know where your trajectory is going to be.
Sure.
But there's one thing that kind of down, I guess you would say, just brings down entrepreneurs, is thinking too far ahead sometimes, because if you want it, you get so fixated on building structure and building these foundations that the pyramid, the base takes the widest, structure. But when you're building this, you're always thinking that you want to be at the peak of this pyramid already.
Definitely. And
sometimes you just like try to race up there too fast, and you just fall right back down because it's like you're not ready for it.
Absolutely. And then, that's one thing that I've told a bunch of my friends and, a bunch of, colleagues and associates, like, growing too fast can potentially work against you. You're absolutely right. Having a solid foundation, having a solid base is going to be like the catalyst of whether you're going to have a successful business or accomplish your mission in the long run. Raving,
long-term thinking.
You got to do a little bit of both. You got to do short-term thinking, and you got to do long-term thinking. You have to, also stay on topic. You have to stay on what you're doing, and not, try to not get, myopia, where all you're doing is just looking at one thing. It really depends on what exactly it is you're trying to accomplish. But I can say that all you really need is, do you have an idea? Do you have a goal? Identify that idea and that goal, right? And then start expanding. Let's do the tree thing, right? Mm-hmm. What's my goal? What do I want to do? I actually started a small business consultation firm in late 2017, right after I graduated. And it started off with just like friends and people, but I got my degree in business and marketing. I'd already been, in multiple management positions on and off the strip. And I've seen business elements in many varieties, whether it's a small business with 10 employees or a much larger business with 300 employees.
Or a military organization with hundreds of thousands of people.
That too, but I wasn't young or wise enough to really dissect that at the time. I look back and I say, okay, that's a bureaucracy. You're talking about an institution. I'm not going to rival that. That's Amazon. That's, it's above Amazon.
More so you could tie your emotions and the feelings that kind of came with that.
Yes.
You can use that and apply it to things later.
Definitely, from being small to being larger, right? And so I've applied, a lot of those practices. And again, I try to be the person that when I experience things and I see things, I'm very, very, I try to be self-aware. I'm always on myself about being self-aware, being situationally aware, being analytical, like absorbing what's going on around me and then assessing it so that I can use that experience for something. And so, I've done that with a lot of different aspects, and I've carried over a lot of skills and a lot of ideas and a lot of, processes for execution from being exposed to those things. So the number one thing is try to get experience. It's hard to jump into something off the bat without knowing. So whether your experience is working that job or working in that industry or working in a company similar just to get the idea, or be ready to research. I am of the philosophy that when you are set out to do something, it should be your goal to be the expert at that. That maximizes your chances for success.
Facts.
Yeah, I mean, that if you're not trying to become an expert or actively engaged in gaining expertise, right, then all you're doing is wasting your time. And then you're going to ask yourself, why did I fail? Like, being a nerd, nerding out on something is the biggest thing that you can do for yourself.
You have to be 100% committed to it.
You have to be committed. I mean, sometimes you have a passion project and it's working on the side and it's gaining steam. That's fine. But when it's time to get on the ship, like, you need to get on. And so I've had people come to me. I've had some clients talk to me, like, this is my dream. This is my goal. I've had clients come to me and tell me I have a personal issue that I think that this system that I've been kind of like using over the years can help me with. And it has. I've got a friend that's in the cannabis industry. I've helped him create all types of programming for his thing. I've got a friend who's in massage therapy, and I've been helping him develop his business. I got a buddy that has a mobile car wash that needed some help with marketing, and he had one car wash vehicle to go and do this, and now he's got 3. 2 years later, he's tripled his business, and those are good things to do because it shows you that you can just be a one-man show. You're your own man. You have a skill or a talent or a marketable, product or service, and you yourself with the right tools and the right, platform and foundation of how you're going to build your idea, goal, dream, business brand, and to be able to execute it with just your mindset being of, okay, I need to become an expert at this, or I need to develop certain ways to execute this, or I want to accomplish this goal. I need multiple ways to go around it. I need options. And those are all things that are derived from being organized and from doing research.
So I'm curious, what was the transition from this consulting group and now you're in AVGear? This is actually a story that I don't know personally. How did you get into
the consulting thing? Is just something that I started, and I started off just by helping my friends out with their marketing.
Is this still active?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is still active. My main focus unequivocally is with AVGear. But I still have clients and friends that I work with outside of work that, we have Google Drive folders that we share, and, I'm continuing to help them build their business, or, I'll get on Photoshop and help them make some digital flyers for an ad campaign or whatever. But it's definitely not my full-time thing. I got a couple friends here with restaurants that I help them out with. There really was no transition. The marketing consultation thing has always been a passion project. I enjoy helping people realize their dreams. And I also enjoy being asked for my expertise. They come to me, this is my situation. What would you do in my position?
This is right along the lines of mentorship,
exactly,
like we were talking about in the beginning.
Exactly. So this is an opportunity to be like, well, I've experienced X, Y, and Z. So if I were you, I think I would do this, and this would be the way that I would go about it. What's the ultimate goal here? Like asking what the ultimate goal is like the most commonly used phrase in that. Like, what is your goal? Like, what are you trying to get out of this? And be like, oh, well, I'm trying to do this. Would it be better to shoot for this? right? Do you think that this will be more effective for your business? Like, what do you want in the long term?
I think that's the most important question. When people always ask me, when I start the podcast, and now the number one question is always, are you making money or are you monetizing? And I've actually tweeted this. I say, you need to approach people and ask them, what's your goal? What is your long-term goal? Because I was like, what if I'm not trying to monetize this? At least right now, and that's not what I'm trying to do. Trying to build myself, build a brand, build prestige. There's money will follow anything that people see has value. But if there's no value there and you try to hit people over the head with a dollar hammer, then
absolutely. Money should not be the number one overarching goal, right? And a lot of times success does not necessarily equate money. Sometimes it does, and sometimes you want it to. A lot of times you want it to. Having money is good. It's nice.
Money fixes your money problems.
Absolutely. And it fixes some of your other problems too. You got face problems, you can go see a doctor with some money, right?
Also true.
Yeah. So it's all relative. It's not all about the money, but the money helps, right? But yes, the overall goal is, I would rather have a substantial, company that is actively doing things and generating revenue. I don't need to have crazy profit margins, although that would be nice. It's all about the philosophy at the end of the day. There's a lot of get rich quick attitude, and that's not how it works, man. Getting rich, unless you have money handed to you, which I never had, it's about marinating and it's about stewing. It's about, making that pot of chili that takes 16 hours, but in reality, it takes, 4 or 5 years, maybe 10 years to accomplish. And people don't look at it in a bigger picture. Like, I would be totally fine with retiring at like 48. I'm 30 years old. So if I can, get my big break in 18 years, I'd be very happy. Not only that, I don't want to retire at 48. I'm not going to be happy being bored. I'm going to want to keep working because that's just my attitude.
It's just once you get older, you want to focus on something that's a little bit more cognitive related because of your body begins to degrade physically.
Yeah.
So you can't, this is why people who work labor jobs for 40 years, by the time they hit 60, their body's like, all right, done. I'm ready to tap out. Absolutely. Like, I'm ready to get out of this life very soon. But if you're able to harness the power of your philosophical thinking, your mentorship, your leadership, and something like consulting, that's something that you could use forever. That's never going to go away. People always need assistance, or even somebody simply to just bounce ideas off of.
Definitely. I mean, it's the same thing with the military. Guys who are in the infantry for 20, 25 years, by the time they're done with that, their bodies are done, which is why you get such a great retirement plan from the military. It's one of those jobs. But yeah, definitely. So
it's interesting. Tell me something about AVGear. We didn't touch about it. Just give me the 5-minute breakdown of what it is.
Sure. Shameless plug time.
Yeah.
AVGear is a Las Vegas based audio visual company. We are not a rental company. We are a audiovisual production, basically a service provider, and we buy and we sell professional audiovisual equipment, both online, both with our clientele, through many various ways. So essentially, we are a catalyst in the movement of audiovisual equipment through the industry and outside of the industry. So we do a lot of things. Obviously, we have a website, so we have an e-commerce and e-tail aspect to us. So we do sell to the end user. A big thing of what we're doing right now is asset disposition. So, obviously with COVID, large gatherings are not really a thing, and they haven't been since March. So unfortunately, the audiovisual, the live events industry, the concerts and all of those things, they've been pretty much paralyzed through this whole time. So pro audiovisual is, cameras and lighting and staging and production equipment and, speakers. If you go to a EDC, everything you see on the stage, from the stage to the turntables, to the massive speaker arrays, to the pyro and the effects and the LED walls on the background, all of those things are things that's the equipment that I deal with, as well as broadcast equipment and anything that has to do with production, staging, video, audio, all of those audio, this whole setup here for this podcast studio. That's one of the components of Pro AV.
I see the next phase is going to be pro grade streaming equipment too,
which is very hard right now. We got some stuff. definitely listed online, and definitely we have access to plenty of gear. So if anybody needs anything, just contact me at avgear.com.
A plug.
So back to, the current state of audiovisual, no large gatherings. A lot of the rental companies, the companies that do conventions, the companies that do concerts, the companies that do CES and SHOT Show, the ones that they build the booths and they do all of the lighting and the sound and the staging, those companies are having a very, very hard time right now. There has not been a lot of focus on them with the CARES Act. There was a Save Our Stages Act that tried to get pushed through the legislature that did not get passed, that would have offered an additional PPP, financial relief, for specifically this industry, because the lack of gatherings means lack of work. And unfortunately, a lot of companies are looking for ways to liquidate their assets, to liquidate those speakers and those LED walls and the staging and the cameras and the lighting, et cetera. So my company is in a unique position, is that we've been doing this for years. We've, over the last couple months, we've been definitely getting some traction on larger companies that are basically, they're divesting from large amounts of inventory so they can keep their employees paid, or they can keep the lights on, or they can try to weather the storm until the next job comes in, whether it's a concert or a convention or a festival, or, a church is getting re-outfitted with their cameras and their speakers for the mega churches. That's a big client here, so in that respect, it's heartbreaking to see that businesses are struggling through this and are not making it. And, these companies that have been around for a very long time and that have been putting on very large shows and productions, whether in their locale or not, or, they're no longer going to be in business. But my company offers them a solution. We are able to liquidate their assets. We are definitely, we are so flexible and customizable in how we go about this. If we get calls from our clients, it's all about, what is the time frame? When do you need this money by? How would we work with them on sales strategy? Does this need to go to auction tomorrow? Like, is this distressed? Do you have until, Q2 of next year? Because that way I can sell your gear differently and get more money for it if the right buyer comes up. So we do that on a big level in the industry, on business to business right now. We also work with on the consumer level. My website is a platform that anybody can go on. They can register. They can put their old pro audiovisual gear. They can create their own listing and they can sell it to my audience, who are people who buy pro AV gear.
It sounds like both of you guys are adapting to the situation at hand right now.
Yes.
As far as liquidations and the industry, because everyone knows that it's going to take a while, especially Vegas, probably going to be last to recover.
Yeah, Vegas is, it's because we're so reliant on tourism. We really don't have that big of a local economy, not enough to support this many people living in town, which really is sad. But yeah, I think that really depends on what's going to happen in this election. It's a big part of it, as much as, nobody really wants to admit it. One candidate wants to open up the country, another one wants to shut it down. It's a little bit less black and white than what I said, but essentially that's kind of where the motifs are going. So, one of them is going to, one outcome is going to benefit this particular economic debacle that we're looking at and seeing, and then one of them is going to perpetuate it. So I just want people to get back to work and to be able to feed their kids. And I think a strong economy, it leads to happier, more well-fed population. And I think those things are important for a society.
There's a phrase actually that I heard recently where it's the after effects of a virus shouldn't be more substantial than the actual effect of the virus itself.
Absolutely. And then somebody will argue with that and they'll say 220,000 people, but I'm pretty sure the CDC came out and said that the way that they were tracking COVID deaths was adjusted, and that number is far smaller. And I don't see the point in treating it like it's a death wish. If you go outside, like if you get COVID, you automatically die, because nothing can be farther for the truth. So whether you're looking from a perspective of this is how many cases we have, to this is how many hospitalizations we have, to this is how many deaths we have,
Yeah, the lethalness of the virus is actually becoming diminished the more that it passes around. And I actually had nurses on that actually echoed that message as well that they've seen. So we'll see. By the time that this comes out, I think we'll have a clear idea, especially if you listened all the way to this point. Then I thank you guys for doing so, because I think this will be our exit to this conversation. It's been going on
awesome
hot ass minute, but I always ask 2 questions on the way out. So the first question is, the year is 2030. What would you like to see happen in the life of Gill Hayon by then?
The year is 2030. I would like in my life to be sitting on my porch on a nice piece of property, bouncing a baby on my knee, drinking some sweet tea and shooting a squirrel from my rocking chair.
Interesting. I like it. Any business aspirations? Any personal aspirations by then?
Absolutely. I think that by 2030, if we're all lucky and the things go the way that they should, I think AVGear is going to be in a fantastic place. And we've built this company a lot. I want to continue making the strides that we have on creating AVGear to be the number one, hub for all pro audio visual from anybody who is related to the industry, whether it's a large corporation with $1 billion worth of assets to the, independent filmmaker who wants to, sell their old camera and replace it with a new one or get any of their gear. I want to be able to serve the entire, anybody who uses audiovisual equipment. I want AVGear to be the place that they can go to get a good deal, get great customer service, and be able to achieve their dreams because the equipment was made available to them at a price that they can handle. Obviously, I want all of my other ventures to succeed by then as well. So I think realistically, I will define my success in 10 years as if I'm able to, I'm able to look back at my businesses. I can measure their growth and be content with the level of transactions and the level of impact that my businesses are having on their respective industries.
I like that precision type thinking. It's very well
Thank you.
put. What does Las Vegas mean to you?
Las Vegas. Las Vegas is home in a way. Las Vegas is this enigma, right? Because there is so much of my identity that's tied to Las Vegas. However, I don't view myself as the average Las Vegan. Las Vegas is a crazy, awesome place in the desert that was built by a bunch of Jews and Italians back in the late 40s and early 50s. And lack of regulation and abundance of balls turned this city into the coolest, craziest, most awesome, shittiest, most amazing city of all.
In the world.
America.
Man. America.
Yeah.
Where can all of the listeners learn more about you?
If you guys want to learn more about me, well, I'd point you to my company. AVGear.com is definitely a place where you can get a lot of information. You can check me out on my LinkedIn, Gill Hayon. There's a little bit more specificity about me. You can see some of the other stuff I've done, a little bit more into my military career, some of the private security stuff that I've done. I'm pretty well-rounded. Check me out on my Instagram, Gillian11, Gillyon11.
Hey, all day. Like I said, guys, there's actually a ton of stuff that we didn't even get to cover. This guy has been through a lot, has so much knowledge to provide to all of you. Just reach out to him as we talked before. Don't be afraid because we're all here. We just want to share our insight of what we've done in this life.
I'm an open book. You can use me.
Use me and abuse me.
Abuse me.
Thank you, Gil, for doing this, man. I've been waiting for such a long time. This came out. We almost tied the record that I did with Alon. So
where are we at?
2 hours and 22 minutes.
Jeez. All right, cool. For sure. That's going to be a nice long one.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, brother. I appreciate you.
Happy Veterans Day, guys, and we'll catch you next time.